They trained her to disappear so completely that most nobles never realized they were stepping around a human being. The Duke noticed her in less than 30 seconds. The blood hit the marble floor just after midnight, dark red against white stone, beautiful in the cruelest possible way. Clara Whitmore dropped to her knees before anyone could scream at her to do it. The ballroom above Blackthorn Estate still pulsed with music. Violins floated through crystal chandeliers and gold candlelight while the richest families in northern England pretended not to notice the disaster unfolding near the grand staircase. A young lord had collapsed after too much champagne and an unfortunate encounter with a decorative fountain shaped like a swan. His forehead struck the edge of the marble steps on the way down. Now blood spread across the polished floor in thin rivers that reflected the candlelight like spilled wine. The nobles stepped away from it immediately, not because they were frightened for the injured man, because aristocrats hated ugly things, especially ugly things that interrupted expensive evenings. Clara lowered her head and reached for the cleaning cloth hanging from her apron. Nobody looked directly at her. They never did. She was only the floor maid, the invisible girl who appeared after accidents and vanished before conversations resumed. "Clean it quickly," the head butler hissed under his breath as he passed her. "His Grace is still downstairs." Clara nodded once. "Yes, sir." Her voice was soft, careful, the kind of voice people forgot the second it stopped speaking. She dipped the cloth into the bucket beside her and pressed it against the marble. Cold water soaked through her gloves immediately. The blood spread wider before it disappeared. Around her, silk gowns whispered across the ballroom floor. Diamonds glittered beneath candlelight. Someone laughed too loudly near the orchestra balcony. Somewhere behind her, a woman muttered, "Honestly, this house falls apart more every season." Another answered, "That is what happens when the Duke refuses to remarry." Clara kept her eyes lowered. Always lowered. That was the first rule of surviving Blackthorn Estate. Invisible girls did not stare at nobility. Invisible girls cleaned their messes and disappeared before anyone remembered they existed. The orchestra resumed playing. A slow waltz. Elegant. Hollow. Clara reached farther across the marble, trying to wipe away the last thin streak near the staircase when polished leather boots stopped inches from her hand. She froze. Every servant in Blackthorn knew those boots. Black leather. No decoration. Military shine. Duke Rowan Ashbourne never dressed like other nobles. No bright colors. No jeweled cuffs. No gold embroidery. He wore black the way soldiers carried scars. Quietly, permanently, Clara lowered her gaze even farther. "My apologies, Your Grace," the butler said quickly behind her. "The mess is being handled." Silence answered him. Heavy silence. The kind that pressed against the room until everyone else stopped breathing inside it. Clara felt it before she heard anything else. The ballroom had gone still. Duke Rowan Ashbourne had that effect on people. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He was 36 years old, widowed young, rumored dangerous, and colder than most men twice his age. Half the aristocracy feared him. The other half wanted his approval badly enough to destroy themselves trying to earn it. Clara had worked inside Blackthorn Estate for nearly 18 months. She had seen him perhaps 7 times. He moved through rooms like bad weather, fast, silent, impossible to ignore. "Leave it," he said finally. His voice was low and rough from disuse. Clara blinked once. She was not sure he meant her. The butler stiffened. "Your Grace. The boy is still bleeding upstairs. Send for more towels." Another pause. "The floor can wait." Several guests shifted awkwardly nearby. Nobody had expected the Duke to prioritize a drunken lordling over imported Italian marble. Clara slowly lifted her head just enough to reach for the bucket. "I can finish quickly, sir." Rowan Ashbourne looked at her then, not through her. Clara felt the impact of it immediately. Pale gray eyes, sharp enough to cut. Men like him were dangerous because they noticed things. Most aristocrats only saw servants when something went wrong. The Duke looked at people like he was trying to uncover what they were hiding beneath their skin. Clara hated that look instantly. "What is your name?" he asked. The question startled the room almost as much as it startled her. Nobles did not ask floor maids their names. "Clara, your grace." "How old are you, Clara?" 22, sir." His eyes moved once across her face. Not lingering, evaluating. Clara fought the sudden urge to look away. "You are bleeding." She looked down. One of the marble edges had cut through her glove while she cleaned. A thin line of blood slid across her palm. She had not noticed. "It is nothing, sir." "You wrapped the injured lord's arm before the physician arrived." Clara's breath caught softly. She should not have done that. She knew better. Invisible girls were not supposed to take control of situations. "I only wanted to stop the bleeding." Rowan studied her another second too long. Most maids would have panicked. Clara forced herself to lower her eyes again. "Most maids are wiser than I am, your grace." Something strange flickered briefly across his expression. Not amusement exactly. Interest, perhaps. Dangerous interest. The kind that got servants dismissed. A sharp female voice cut across the ballroom before the silence could deepen further. "There you are, Rowan." Lady Evelyn Montclair descended the staircase in silver silk and diamonds. Tall, beautiful, perfectly aware of both facts. She stopped beside the Duke with practiced elegance and glanced once toward Clara like she was noticing dirt near her shoes. "Honestly," Evelyn sighed, "this evening has become exhausting." Rowan did not look away from Clara immediately. That unsettled her more than if he had shouted. "The physician says Lord Pembroke will survive," he said flatly. "Then perhaps the orchestra can stop sounding like a funeral procession." Evelyn linked one hand lightly through his arm. "Everyone is waiting for you upstairs." Clara immediately lowered her head again and reached for the bucket. This part she understood. The powerful returned to their beautiful lives. The servants vanished. That was how the world remained orderly. She rose carefully to her feet, balancing the water bucket with one hand. The cut across her palm stung sharply now. "You are dismissed for the evening," Rowan said suddenly. Clara stopped moving. "Your Grace, your hand needs treatment. It is only a scratch." That was not a request. His tone never changed. Somehow that made it worse. Clara swallowed. "Yes, sir." Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly beside him. Small, almost invisible. But Clara saw it. Noble women noticed immediately when powerful men paid attention to the wrong woman. Even accidentally. Clara lowered herself into a quick curtsy and stepped backward with the bucket in hand. "Thank you, your grace." Then she turned and disappeared through the servants' corridor beneath the staircase before the room could fully breathe again. The corridor behind the ballroom was narrow and cold. Stone walls, dim lanterns, the smell of soap and damp linen. Clara walked quickly, heart beating harder than it should have. "Slow down." She nearly dropped the bucket. Mrs. Aldridge, the head housekeeper, stood beside the laundry entrance with crossed arms and a permanent expression of disappointment. "You look like someone chased you." Clara exhaled softly. "No one chased me." "That is unfortunate. At least then you would have an excuse for looking terrified." Clara managed the smallest smile. Mrs. Aldridge snorted once and noticed the blood on Clara's glove immediately. "Wonderful. Another injury." She grabbed Clara's wrist without gentleness and pulled her toward the servants' washroom. "Sit." Clara obeyed silently while the older woman unwrapped the ruined glove. "What happened?" "Marble edge. Mrs. Aldridge cleaned the cut with rough efficiency. "You were upstairs when the Lord fell?" "Yes." "And the Duke spoke to you?" "Not a question." Clara looked down at her lap. "Briefly. That alone will keep the servants gossiping for a week." Clara stiffened immediately. Mrs. Aldridge noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed everything. "Relax," the housekeeper muttered. "Nobody thinks His Grace has suddenly fallen in love with a floor maid." Clara almost laughed at the absurdity of it. "Almost. Good," she said quietly instead. Mrs. Aldridge tied clean bandages around Clara's hand. "Still, be careful." Clara frowned slightly. Of what? The older woman gave her a long look. Men who notice things. A cold draft slipped beneath the washroom door. Somewhere above them the ballroom music swelled louder again. Clara stared down at the fresh white bandage wrapped around her hand. Men who notice things. She hated how accurate that felt. Because Duke Rowan Ashbourne had looked at her tonight the same way educated men studied puzzles. And Clara Whitmore had spent 14 years surviving by making certain nobody looked too closely at her at all. 1 hour later the ballroom finally emptied. Footmen extinguished candles across the estate one by one until darkness swallowed most of Blackthorn Manor whole. Clara finished scrubbing the final corridor near the west wing just before 2 in the morning. Her back ached. Her hands smelled like soap and metal. The bandage beneath her glove had already soaked through faintly pink. She carried the empty water bucket downstairs toward the servant quarters beneath the estate when voices stopped her near the library hall. Male voices. Aristocratic. Clara stepped automatically into the shadows before they could notice her. "You are overreacting," someone said quietly. "She is a servant." Rowan Ashbourne answered immediately. "No servant reads Latin medical text upside down." Clara went completely still. Ice slid through her chest. Another man laughed softly. "Perhaps you imagined it." "I do not imagine things." Silence followed. Heavy silence. Then Rowan spoke again. Lower this time. More dangerous. "Find out where the girl came from." Clara's fingers tightened painfully around the bucket handle. "Rowan." The other man warned carefully. "It is late. You are building ghosts out of exhausted servants." No, a pause. "I think someone buried a noblewoman inside my household and expected nobody to notice." Clara stopped breathing. Footsteps approached suddenly. She turned immediately and vanished deeper into the dark servant corridor before anyone could see her face. Upstairs, beyond stone walls and dying candlelight, the Duke of Blackthorn had started asking questions. And for the first time in 14 years, Clara Whitmore realized her past might finally be hunting its way back toward her. The most dangerous secrets were never hidden inside vaults. They were hidden inside people everyone had stopped seeing. Clara did not sleep that night. She lay awake in the narrow attic room above the servant wing listening to rain strike the slate roof in uneven rhythms while cold air slipped through cracks in the stone walls. Her candle had burned out nearly an hour earlier. Darkness pressed around her like wet fabric. Usually she liked the quiet. Invisible people learned to love silence because silence was safe. Silence meant nobody was asking questions. Tonight silence felt dangerous. Rowan Ashbourne knew something was wrong. Not everything. Not yet. But enough to begin looking. Clara stared at the ceiling and forced herself to breathe slowly. 14 years. She had survived 14 years by staying forgettable. Small voice. Lowered eyes. Plain dresses. Rough hands. She scrubbed floors. Emptied fireplaces. Washed blood from marble after noblemen drank too much wine and embarrassed themselves. Nobody questioned a girl like that. Nobody wondered where she came from. Until tonight. At 5:30 the servant bells rang through Blackthorn Estate. Clara rose immediately before the second chime could sound. The attic room was barely larger than a storage closet. One narrow bed. One cracked mirror. One wooden chair beside a tiny frost-covered window overlooking the eastern gardens. She dressed quickly in the dark gray servant uniform laid across the chair. Thick wool skirt. Plain apron. High collar. Nothing memorable. Nothing feminine enough to attract notice. She braided her pale hair tightly against her scalp and washed her face in freezing water from the basin. The bandage around her hand had spotted red overnight. Clara rewrapped it carefully before pulling on fresh gloves. Then she unlocked the attic door from the inside and stepped into the corridor. A second lock sat outside the door itself. Heavy iron. Unnecessary. Her eyes lingered on it for 1 second too long. Most servants at Blackthorn had ordinary rooms below stairs. Clara slept in the attic because Mrs. Aldridge claimed there had been no space when she first arrived. That had always sounded strange to Clara. Blackthorn Estate had over 60 bedrooms. Still, she had never complained. Invisible girls did not complain. The The servant corridors downstairs already smelled like fresh bread and coal smoke by the time she entered the kitchens. Cook shouted instructions near the ovens while footmen hurried silver trays toward the breakfast rooms upstairs. Clara moved automatically through the chaos. Quiet, efficient, forgettable. "You are late." Clara looked up. Mrs. Aldridge stood near the pantry doorway with crossed arms and sharp gray eyes. 3 minutes, the housekeeper added. Clara lowered her gaze immediately. "I apologize. You usually wake before the bells." "I did not sleep well." Mrs. Aldridge's expression shifted slightly. Not softer, just more observant. "You look pale." Clara almost smiled at that. Everyone looked pale inside Blackthorn Estate. The manor swallowed sunlight whole. "I am fine, Emmem." The older woman handed her a stack of folded linens. "The West Library needs cleaning before noon. His Grace is using the room for correspondence this morning." Clara's stomach tightened instantly. Mrs. Aldridge noticed. Of course she noticed. "Problem?" "No, ma'am." "Then stop looking like you are marching toward execution." Clara took the linens quietly. "Yes, ma'am." The West Library sat on the second floor overlooking the winter gardens. It was one of the few warm rooms in the entire estate. Dark oak shelves lined every wall from floor to ceiling. Thousands of books, leather, dust, candle wax, old paper. Clara had always loved the smell of libraries. That was dangerous too. She entered carefully just after 7 in the morning carrying fresh linens and polishing cloths. Rain streaked the tall windows overlooking the frozen gardens outside. A fire crackled low inside the marble hearth. Duke Rowan Ashbourne sat alone at the far desk near the windows wearing a black waistcoat with the sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. He did not look up immediately when she entered. His attention remained fixed on several open documents spread across the desk. Clara kept her eyes lowered. "Your Grace." "Clara." Her name sounded strange in his voice. Too deliberate. "The library requires cleaning, sir." "Then clean it." She moved silently toward the shelves nearest the door and began dusting books one by one. Usually nobles ignored servants while they worked. Rowan Ashbourne did not. Clara felt his attention before she looked toward him again. Heavy, focused, uncomfortable. The scratching of his pen stopped. "Where did you learn Latin?" Clara's hand froze briefly against the shelf. "Only briefly." "I do not understand the question, sir." "Yes, you do." His voice remained calm. That made the danger worse. Clara continued dusting carefully. "I know only a few words from church services." "Interesting." Silence stretched. Clara moved to the next shelf. "Because last night you translated a physician's note upside down in less than 5 seconds. Ice spread slowly through her stomach. She had not even realized she looked at the paper long enough to read it. Stupid. Careless. "I saw only a few words." The note was written entirely in Latin. Clara said nothing. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Rowan finally rose from the desk. Tall, broad-shouldered, controlled in the terrifying way military men often were. He crossed the room slowly until he stood near the bookshelf beside her. Clara kept dusting. "Look at me." She obeyed before she could stop herself. His gray eyes studied her face carefully, not like a man admiring a woman, like a strategist examining a battlefield. "Who taught you?" Clara forced calm into her voice. "My father could read a little." "What was his profession?" "Clerk work." "Where?" "Yorkshire." Rowan watched her another second. "You lie very smoothly for someone pretending to be frightened." Clara's pulse stumbled hard once. "I am frightened, sir." Something almost dark flickered across his expression. "Good. That means you still possess common sense." He turned suddenly toward the desk and picked up a folded letter. "Read this." Clara stared at the paper in his outstretched hand. "Your Grace." "Read it." "I should not." "Why?" "Because I am a servant. And servants cannot read." Clara lowered her eyes again. "Not this kind of writing." Rowan stepped closer. Close enough for her to smell cedar smoke and winter air clinging faintly to his coat. You speak like an educated woman trying very hard not to. Clara's fingers tightened around the dust cloth. I do not know what you mean. No? He unfolded the letter slowly. Then perhaps you can explain why a floor maid recognizes Roman medical terminology, carries herself like nobility, and pronounces French vowels with a court-educated accent. Clara stopped breathing for one dangerous second. She had hidden the accent for years. Years. You are mistaken. Am I? Silence swallowed the room. Somewhere downstairs a grandfather clock chimed 8 times. Rowan never looked away from her face. Read the letter, Clara. She should refuse. Smart girls refused dangerous men. But refusal would confirm everything. Slowly she took the paper from his hand. The letter shook slightly before she steadied it. Latin legal script. Old style. Difficult. Clara scanned it once automatically. Her training returned before she could stop it. It concerns land taxation disputes near Durham, she said quietly. The second paragraph references inheritance transfers through maternal lineage. The silence afterward felt enormous. Clara realized her mistake instantly. Too fluent. Too fast. She closed her eyes briefly. Rowan Ashbourne watched her the way wolves watched injured things. A remarkable education for a floor maid. Clara handed the letter back carefully. I learned quickly as a child. From a clerk. Yes, sir. And where is this brilliant father now? Clara hesitated. Dangerous. Too much hesitation. Dead. Rowan's expression did not change. How unfortunate. She could not tell whether he meant the death or the lie. A sharp knock interrupted them before the silence could become unbearable. Lady Evelyn Montclair entered without waiting for permission. She wore deep green silk today with emerald earrings that glittered beneath the candlelight. Her gaze moved instantly between Clara and Rowan. Suspicion sharpened her beautiful face immediately. Am I interrupting? Rowan stepped away from Clara at once. No, Evelyn's eyes lingered on Clara another moment too long. Interesting. Clara lowered her gaze immediately and stepped backward. I should finish cleaning elsewhere. Stay, Rowan said. Evelyn smiled then. Slow. Thin. Dangerous. A floor maid in the library during private correspondence? She was dusting shelves. Of course she was. Clara felt the tension shift beneath the conversation like ice cracking beneath water. Evelyn crossed the room gracefully and rested one gloved hand against Rowan's arm. The council members have arrived early. They are waiting downstairs. Rowan did not answer immediately. His eyes moved once more toward Clara. Calculating. Suspicious. Curious. Clara hated all three. Finally he spoke. You may go. Relief hit her so fast it almost hurt. Clara curtsied quickly and moved toward the door without looking back. But just before she reached the hallway, Rowan's voice stopped her again. One more thing. Clara turned carefully. Yes, Your Grace. His gaze settled on her bandaged hand. You favor your right foot when nervous. Her heartbeat stalled. Sir. Military children are taught that posture correction young. Silence flooded the room. Even Evelyn looked confused now. Rowan's expression remained unreadable. You should practice hiding it better. Clara left the library without another word. She walked calmly through the hallway, down the servants' staircase, past the kitchens, through the lower corridors beneath the estate. Calmly. Only when she reached the empty laundry room did she finally stop moving. Her hands shook violently around the linen basket. Military children. Dear God. He was getting too close. Upstairs in the library, Duke Rowan Ashbourne stood near the rain-streaked windows watching the servant courtyard below while Lady Evelyn studied him carefully. You suspect her of something? Evelyn said quietly. Yes. What? Rowan's eyes remained fixed on the courtyard. Clara had just emerged below carrying folded sheets through the snow-dusted stone path. Small figure. Gray uniform. Head lowered. Invisible. Except she was not invisible anymore. Not to him. I think, Rowan said slowly, someone taught that girl how to survive a war before teaching her how to scrub floors. The problem with locked doors was that eventually someone always started asking why they existed in the first place. Snow fell over Blackthorn Estate sometime after midnight. Thin white frost gathered across the iron gates, the garden statues, and the dead rose vines curling along the eastern walls. Clara watched it through the tiny attic window while sitting motionless on the edge of her bed with a candle burning low beside her. She still wore her servant uniform. She had not bothered changing. Her thoughts felt too loud tonight for sleep. Rowan Ashbourne had begun noticing details she had spent years hiding. The accent, the posture, the Latin, even the way she favored her right foot under stress. That terrified her most. Not because he suspected something, because he was correct. Clara closed her eyes briefly and pressed cold fingers against her forehead. 14 years ago, another man had noticed details too. A man with gray military gloves and a silver pocket watch. She could still remember his voice saying, "The child survives because nobody important remembers her face." She had been 8 years old then. Cold. Smoke everywhere. A woman screaming somewhere behind her while hands pulled Clara through darkness, and snow toward a black carriage waiting near frozen trees. She remembered the smell of burned velvet. She remembered someone wrapping a heavy coat around her shoulders. After that, the memories became fractured pieces instead of whole scenes. New names. Cheap boarding houses. Instructions whispered carefully. Never say too much. Never speak like them. Never let noble families see what you learned before the fire. Clara opened her eyes again. The candle flame trembled weakly beside the bed. Her gaze drifted toward the heavy iron lock mounted outside her attic door. She hated that lock. Not because it trapped her. Because she had never understood who it was meant to keep out. A sudden knock startled her. Clara stood immediately. "Who is it?" "Mrs. Aldrich." Clara exhaled softly and unlocked the door. The housekeeper entered carrying folded blankets beneath one arm. "The heating pipes failed downstairs again," she muttered. "The younger maids are freezing." Clara accepted the blankets quietly. "Thank you." Mrs. Aldrich stopped moving near the bed. Her eyes narrowed slightly toward the untouched servant dinner tray sitting beside the wash basin. "You did not eat." "I was not hungry." "That is a lie." Clara looked away. The older woman sighed sharply through her nose. "You have looked hunted all day." "I am fine. Mrs. Aldrich crossed her arms. "His Grace questioned you again." Clara said nothing. Silence confirmed enough. "Wonderful," the housekeeper muttered. "Exactly what I feared." Clara looked up immediately. "Feared?" Mrs. Aldrich realized her mistake too late. Clara saw it happen across her face. One careless second. "Nothing. You already knew he would notice me." Another silence. Dangerous silence. Mrs. Aldrich turned toward the tiny attic window instead of answering. Snow drifted beyond the glass in pale silver sheets. "People like the Duke notice inconsistencies," she said carefully. "That is what powerful men do. You warned me before he even questioned me." The older woman's jaw tightened. "You ask too many questions for someone who values staying invisible." Clara stared at her. "Who locked this room from the outside?" Mrs. Aldrich's expression changed completely then. Not anger. Not shock. Something sadder. Older. "Go to sleep, Clara." "Why am I up here?" "Enough." No, Clara rarely raised her voice. The sound startled both of them. "I have worked here nearly 2 years. Nobody else sleeps behind an iron lock." Mrs. Aldrich looked tired suddenly. Deeply tired. "Some locks exist for protection." "Against what?" The housekeeper's eyes settled on Clara's face for one long moment. "Against people who would recognize you." Clara's breath stopped. The silence afterward felt enormous. Snow tapped softly against the attic window. Somewhere below them pipes groaned through the walls. "Recognize me as who?" Clara whispered. Mrs. Aldrich stepped backward toward the door. "Sleep, child. Please." The older woman hesitated only briefly. Then she left without another word. The lock clicked shut from outside again. Clara stood motionless in the middle of the attic room while cold fear spread slowly beneath her ribs. Recognize you. Dear God, what had Mrs. Aldridge just admitted? Downstairs, the West Wing study remained lit long after midnight. Rowan Ashbourne stood beside the fireplace holding an old military record beneath candlelight while rain and snow battered the windows beyond him. Captain Elias Whitmore, Northern Regiment, decorated for service during the border campaigns. Deceased 14 years earlier following the Blackmere Estate fire. Rowan read the final lines twice. Survived by wife and one daughter. Daughter deceased in fire. He frowned. Something troubles you. Rowan glanced toward the doorway. Nathaniel Mercer entered carrying 2 glasses of whiskey. Tall, lean, former cavalry officer. One of the only men Rowan trusted completely. Nathaniel handed him a glass carefully. You have been staring at those records for nearly an hour. Rowan accepted the drink without answering immediately. Do you remember Blackmere? Nathaniel's expression darkened slightly. The estate fire? Yes. Most of northern England remembers it. Wealthy family. Political connections. Half the household died. Rowan looked back toward the documents. The daughter supposedly died too. Supposedly? Rowan handed over the file. Nathaniel scanned the records quickly before frowning. You think the maid is connected? I know she is. That is a serious accusation based on posture and pronunciation. Rowan moved toward the window overlooking the servant courtyard below. Snow covered the stone paths now in white frost. When I was 14, he said quietly, my father hired diplomats from Vienna for 6 months. Nathaniel waited silently. The Whitmore girl spent an entire winter among them. Rowan's gray eyes hardened slightly. Clara pronounces French vowels with Austrian influence. Not English. Nathaniel looked genuinely surprised now. That specific? Military training teaches observation. Rowan sipped the whiskey once. Children do not invent aristocratic court education accidentally. Nathaniel leaned back against the desk slowly. If she truly is connected to Blackmere, then why hide as a servant? That, Rowan said softly, is the interesting question. Upstairs in the attic, Clara sat on the floor beside her bed with an old wooden box resting across her knees. She had not opened it in over a year. Slowly she lifted the lid. Inside rested only 3 things. A silver hair ribbon burned dark along one edge. A child-sized leather glove. And beneath both items, wrapped carefully inside faded cloth, a signet ring bearing a crest she had spent 14 years pretending not to recognize. Clara stared at the ring while candlelight trembled across the silver surface. A crown above crossed wolves. House Whitmore. Her real family. Her real name. Her real death. Her fingers shook slightly as she reached toward it. Then footsteps sounded suddenly outside the attic door. Heavy footsteps. Male. Clara slammed the wooden box shut instantly. Silence followed. Then a quiet knock. Not Mrs. Aldridge this time. Clara stood slowly. Who is it? A pause. Deep enough to make her stomach tighten. Open the door, Clara. Rowan Ashbourne. Her pulse stumbled violently. Impossible. Nobles did not enter servant attics after midnight. Especially dukes. Clara hid the wooden box beneath the bed before moving toward the door carefully. Your Grace. Open it. She unlocked the door slowly. Rowan stood outside wearing a black overcoat dusted with snow. Candlelight from the corridor sharpened every hard line across his face. Behind him 2 servant girls pretended not to stare from farther down the hallway. Shock spread through the corridor like smoke. A duke standing outside a maid's attic room at midnight would feed gossip for years. Rowan's eyes moved briefly across Clara's face before settling on the iron lock mounted outside the door. His expression changed instantly. Cold. Dangerous. Why is there a lock on your room? Clara's throat tightened. I do not know, sir. Rowan touched the iron mechanism once with gloved fingers. Who installed this? I never asked. His jaw hardened slightly. That was careless. Clara almost laughed at the absurdity of that. Careless. As though she had chosen any part of this life. What do you want, Your Grace? Rowan looked back toward her. Your employment records disappeared. Ice flooded her chest. Sir. No birthplace listed. No references. No contract signatures before Blackthorn. His voice lowered. Almost like someone erased your existence before you arrived here. Clara forced herself not to react. I cannot explain estate paperwork. Rowan studied her another long second. Then his gaze shifted past her shoulder toward the dark attic room behind her. The tiny bed, the cracked mirror, the cold stone walls, and finally the second iron lock mounted inside the room itself. His expression became unreadable. You sleep here every night? Clara swallowed once. Yes, sir. Silence stretched between them. Something changed in Rowan's face then. Not suspicion exactly. Something quieter. Worse. Anger. Not directed at her. Someone else. This room is unacceptable. Clara blinked. Sir. No servant under my roof should sleep in a locked attic. Her pulse quickened dangerously. Please do not move me. Rowan frowned immediately. Why? Because if they moved her belongings they might find the box beneath the bed. Because if they searched the room they might discover the signet ring. Because people who recognized her were finally getting too close. Clara lowered her eyes quickly. I prefer the quiet. Rowan watched her carefully. You are lying again. Before she could answer, another voice echoed sharply from the staircase behind him. Rowan? Lady Evelyn Montclair appeared at the corridor entrance wrapped in silver silk robes with one candle holder balanced in her hand. Her expression froze instantly when she saw him standing outside Clara's room. What exactly is going on? Rowan did not look away from Clara immediately. Return downstairs, Evelyn. Her eyes narrowed. It is after midnight. You are standing outside a servant girl's bedroom. And people talk. Rowan finally turned toward her. Then perhaps they should find more productive hobbies. Evelyn's gaze flicked once toward the open attic room before returning sharply to Clara. Understanding spread slowly across her beautiful face. Not full understanding. Worse, jealous suspicion. Clara recognized it instantly because women like Evelyn always looked at lower-born girls that way when powerful men became interested. I see, Evelyn said softly. Rowan's voice cooled another degree. You misunderstand. Do I? Clara stepped backward immediately. I should return to sleep. No, Rowan said. Both women looked toward him. He reached inside his coat slowly and withdrew a folded parchment sealed in dark wax. You are going to explain why this crest appeared hidden inside your missing employment file. Clara looked down at the seal. Her blood turned to ice. Crossed wolves beneath a crown. House Whitmore. Rowan Ashbourne had found her family crest. And for the first time in 14 years, Clara realized the past was no longer approaching quietly. It had finally arrived at her door. Some truths did not arrive gently. They arrived carrying your dead name in someone else's hands. The corridor outside Clara's attic room fell completely silent. Even the wind outside seemed to stop moving against the windows. Clara stared at the folded parchment in Rowan Ashbourne's hand while cold fear spread through her body so quickly it almost felt physical. House Whitmore. He had found the crest. Lady Evelyn Montclair looked between them sharply. What crest? Rowan did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on Clara's face with terrifying calm. I asked you a question earlier, he said quietly. Now I am asking another one. Clara forced herself to breathe slowly. I do not know what that is. Another lie. Rowan. Evelyn interrupted softly. Perhaps this conversation should happen somewhere less public. Public. Clara glanced down the corridor instinctively. The two servant girls who had lingered near the staircase were gone now. Smart enough to disappear before a duke noticed them listening. Still, rumors already moved through Blackthorn faster than winter wind. By morning the entire estate would know Rowan Ashbourne visited a floor maid's locked attic after midnight. Evelyn stepped closer toward him. You are frightening her. Rowan finally looked away from Clara. That is not my intention. Then what is? His jaw tightened slightly. I am trying to understand why someone erased this woman from official records. Clara's pulse stumbled hard. Woman, not girl, not servant. The distinction unsettled her more than it should have. Evelyn crossed her arms carefully beneath the silver silk robe wrapped around her shoulders. You cannot honestly believe she is connected to House Whitmore. Rowan unfolded the parchment slowly. The employment file hidden inside the estate archives carried this seal. Clara kept her face still with effort. Anyone could possess old paper. Not this paper. Rowan's gaze returned to her. This wax formula was exclusive to Blackmere Estate before the fire. Clara knew that already. She remembered watching her father seal letters with dark red wax while sitting beside enormous library windows overlooking snow-covered gardens. She remembered his signet ring pressing into softened wax with perfect precision. She remembered his voice saying, "A family crest is a promise. Protect it carefully." Her throat tightened painfully. "I think you are mistaken, Your Grace." Rowan stepped closer without warning. Not enough to touch her. Enough to force her attention upward. "Look at me and say that again." Clara obeyed before she could stop herself. Gray eyes met gray eyes. Dangerous mistake. The Duke studied her face with relentless focus. "You recognize the crest." It was not a question anymore. Clara felt her composure crack slightly around the edges. "No, yes." His voice remained quiet. "You do." Evelyn looked sharply between them now. Suspicion deepened across her expression. "Rowan." He ignored her completely. "Who are you?" The question landed harder than Clara expected. Because she did not know how to answer anymore. Clara Whitmore was a servant. An attic girl. A floor maid who cleaned marble and carried coal through frozen hallways. But another name still lived buried beneath that life. Another girl. One who died 14 years ago beside fire and smoke. "I am exactly who I told you I was." Rowan watched her another second too long. Then suddenly his gaze shifted past her shoulder toward the dark attic room behind her. "May I enter?" Clara froze instantly. Absolutely not. The wooden box remained hidden beneath the bed. The ring, the ribbon, the last pieces of her old life. "It is very late," she said carefully. Rowan noticed the panic anyway. Of course he did. "Interesting," he murmured softly. "You were calm until I asked that." Evelyn's eyes narrowed immediately toward Clara. "What exactly are you hiding in there?" "Nothing." Too fast. Rowan noticed that too. His expression hardened slightly. "Step aside, Clara." Fear hit her hard enough to blur her thoughts for one dangerous second. "Please." Rowan paused. It was the first genuine emotion she had shown him. He saw it immediately. "Why?" Clara swallowed painfully. Think. "It is embarrassing." Evelyn laughed softly. "Embarrassing?" Clara lowered her gaze. "The room is small. Untidy." Rowan did not move. "I have seen war hospitals, Clara. I doubt your room will shock me." Another step closer. "Move." She should obey. A servant refusing a duke could lose employment instantly. But if he found the ring, everything would unravel tonight. Clara forced herself to stay still despite the panic clawing through her chest. "Please," she whispered again. Something shifted behind Rowan's eyes then. Confusion, perhaps. Because frightened people usually retreated from him. Clara was terrified and still blocking the doorway. Protecting something. Before the silence could deepen further, Mrs. Aldridge appeared suddenly at the end of the corridor carrying a lantern. She stopped short immediately when she saw Rowan standing outside the attic room. "Your Grace." Relief flashed through Clara so quickly it almost hurt. Rowan turned slightly. "Why is there a lock on this servant's room?" The housekeeper's expression became carefully neutral. "The mechanism was installed years ago." "Why?" "Storage security originally." Rowan's eyes hardened. "Do not insult my intelligence." Mrs. Aldridge held his gaze calmly. "I would not dream of it." "Then answer me honestly." The older woman hesitated only briefly. The girl arrived frightened. The attic made her feel safe. Clara stared at her. Safe. Rowan clearly did not believe the explanation either. A lock from the outside rarely comforts the person inside it. Mrs. Aldridge folded her hands. Perhaps not, but it comforted others. Silence spread sharply through the corridor. Rowan noticed the wording instantly. Others. Clara closed her eyes briefly. No. Mrs. Aldridge realized her mistake too late. Evelyn stepped forward immediately. What does that mean? The older woman said nothing. Rowan's voice lowered another degree. Who feared her? Nobody feared Clara. You almost used another name. Mrs. Aldridge stiffened. Clara's heartbeat became thunder inside her ears. Rowan noticed everything. Every hesitation. Every shift in breathing. Interesting, he said softly again. Very interesting. Evelyn looked openly alarmed now. Rowan, enough. No, his eyes remained fixed on Mrs. Aldridge. How long have you known? The older woman met his gaze steadily. Long enough. Clara stared at her in disbelief. You knew. Mrs. Aldridge finally looked toward Clara then. Sadness shadowed her face deeply. I recognized your mother's eyes the first day you arrived. Clara stopped breathing. Her mother. Nobody had spoken about her mother in 14 years. Memories crashed suddenly through Clara's mind. Warm hands adjusting velvet gloves. A soft voice reading beside library fires. A silver music box playing somewhere distant. Clara staggered backward slightly. Rowan noticed immediately. Whitmore, he said quietly. Your real name is Whitmore. Clara could not answer, because silence was safer than hearing the truth spoken aloud. Evelyn's face lost color. That family died. Rowan looked toward her without turning fully away from Clara. Apparently not all of them. Evelyn laughed once under her breath. Sharp. Uncertain. This is absurd. Is it? Rowan unfolded the parchment again. The surviving daughter was approximately 8 years old during the fire. Clara's age matches perfectly. Evelyn looked toward Clara now with something colder than jealousy. Calculation. If this becomes public, Rowan finished the thought calmly. Several powerful families would panic. The corridor fell silent again. Clara realized suddenly what frightened her most was not exposure. It was hope. Tiny. Fragile. Dangerous hope that maybe someone finally believed the truth. She hated herself for feeling it. I should leave, she whispered. Rowan's gaze snapped back toward her immediately. Leave where? Anywhere else. No, the answer came too quickly, too firmly. Clara stared at him in surprise. Rowan looked almost irritated by his own response. If someone truly erased your identity once already, wandering alone would be foolish. I have managed alone for years, and ended up locked inside an attic. The words landed harder than he intended. Clara looked away immediately. Rowan saw the hurt flash across her face and something dark tightened behind his ribs unexpectedly. He was not accustomed to guilt, especially not toward servants. Before anyone could speak again, footsteps thundered rapidly up the staircase below. A young footman appeared breathless at the corridor entrance. Your Grace. Rowan turned sharply. What? There has been an accident in the archives downstairs. Clara's stomach dropped instantly. Rowan frowned. What kind of accident? The footman swallowed hard. Fire, sir. Silence crashed through the corridor. Fire. Clara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Rowan's expression changed instantly. Cold. Focused. Dangerous. How bad? The lower records room, sir. The guards contained most of it already. Evelyn exhaled sharply. Dear God. Rowan's eyes moved slowly back toward Clara. Understanding spread between them at the exact same moment. Someone had tried to destroy the records. Someone knew the past was surfacing again. And suddenly Clara understood something far worse than exposure. Whoever buried House Whitmore 14 years ago might still be watching. People who survived disasters learned one lesson faster than everyone else. Fire almost never destroyed the evidence people expected it to. The lower archive room beneath Blackthorn Estate smelled like wet ash and smoke by the time Rowan Ashbourne reached it. Footmen rushed through narrow stone corridors carrying buckets while servants whispered in frightened clusters against the walls. Clara followed several steps behind Rowan beside Mrs. Aldridge, her pulse still uneven from the revelation upstairs. Whitmore. The name still echoed painfully inside her chest. Hearing it spoken aloud after 14 years felt like watching a grave open unexpectedly. Rowan pushed through the heavy archive doors without hesitation. Smoke drifted upward through blackened ceiling beams, while water-soaked stacks of ruined documents across the stone floor. Nathaniel Mercer stood near the center table holding a lantern. "It started in the west cabinet," he said immediately. "Small fire. Fast burn." Rowan scanned the damage once. Calm. Focused. Dangerous. Accident. No, Nathaniel pointed toward the shattered oil lantern lying near the shelves. Deliberate. Clara's stomach tightened harder. Rowan crouched beside the burned cabinet slowly. What records were stored here? Nathaniel looked briefly toward Clara before answering. Northern Inheritance Archives. Estate contracts. Employment records. Silence followed immediately. Rowan rose again very slowly. Convenient. Clara wrapped her arms tighter around herself against the cold creeping through the archive room. Someone wanted the records gone. Someone knew exactly which cabinet mattered. Mrs. Aldridge moved closer toward Clara quietly. "Keep your face still," she whispered under her breath. "You look terrified." "I am terrified. Do not let them see it." "Too late for that." Rowan turned toward Clara again. Smoke curled faintly around him beneath lantern light, sharpening every hard angle of his face. "You knew this would happen." Clara stiffened immediately. "No, but you expected something. Anyone would after hearing there was a fire." Rowan stepped closer. "You reacted before the footman finished speaking." Clara forced herself not to retreat. "Because I remember fires." The words escaped before she could stop them. Silence crashed instantly through the archive room. Nathaniel looked sharply toward her. Mrs. Aldridge closed her eyes briefly like someone watching disaster arrive in slow motion. Rowan's gaze locked onto Clara's face. "Tell me." She swallowed hard. "No, Clara. Please." Her voice cracked slightly for the first time since he met her. "Please stop asking." Something flickered behind Rowan's expression then. Not frustration. Something quieter. Because terrified people usually lied loudly. Clara sounded exhausted instead. Like someone who had spent too many years running from memories sharp enough to cut. Nathaniel broke the silence carefully. "Your Grace." Rowan did not look away from Clara. "What?" "There is something else." Nathaniel crossed toward the half-burned cabinet and lifted a scorched leather portfolio from the floor. This survived. Rowan accepted it immediately. The edges had blackened badly, but the inner documents remained mostly intact. Clara's pulse quickened dangerously when she saw the faded silver crest stamped across the front. House Whitmore. Rowan opened the portfolio slowly while ash drifted from the damaged corners. Inside rested several brittle papers tied together with dark ribbon. Birth records. Land contracts. Correspondence. Then one final item slid partially loose beneath the lantern light. Portrait. Burned along one side but still recognizable. Clara stopped breathing. The child in the painting wore pale blue velvet beside enormous winter roses. 8 years old. Gray eyes. Blonde hair pinned back with silver ribbon. Herself. Rowan looked from the portrait to Clara with chilling stillness. Even Nathaniel went silent beside him. "Dear God," Evelyn whispered from the archive doorway. Nobody noticed she had followed them downstairs. Clara stared at the portrait while memories hit her so hard her knees nearly weakened. Her mother adjusting the silver ribbon carefully. Her father laughing softly beside the garden fountain. Snow falling across Blackmere Estate before the fire. Home. Rowan studied the portrait another long second before speaking quietly. "This is you." Clara could not answer, because denying it now would sound absurd even to her own ears. Mrs. Aldridge stepped forward suddenly. "Your Grace." Rowan looked toward her. "What?" "The girl needs air." Clara blinked quickly. Yes. The archive room suddenly felt too small. Too hot despite the cold stone walls. Rowan noticed the panic spreading across her face immediately. "Everyone out," he ordered sharply. Nathaniel hesitated. "Rowan, now." Servants scattered instantly. Evelyn lingered longer than the others. Her eyes remained fixed on Clara with growing realization and something darker beneath it. Calculation. Fear. "This changes things," she said softly. Rowan's expression cooled. "Leave, Evelyn." She held his gaze another second, then finally disappeared into the corridor. Mrs. Aldridge squeezed Clara's arm once before following. Soon only Rowan and Clara remained inside the smoke-stained archive room. Silence settled heavily between them. Water dripped steadily somewhere near the ruined shelves. Clara stared at the portrait still resting in Rowan's hand. "I thought it burned," she whispered. Rowan looked toward her again carefully. "So you admit it now?" Clara closed her eyes briefly. "I do not know what survives anymore." He crossed the room slowly until only a few feet separated them. "Your name?" Clara said nothing. "Tell me your real name." The request sounded quieter than before. Less interrogation, more certainty. Clara stared at the wet stone floor beneath her boots. "Clara Evelyn Whitmore." Rowan exhaled once slowly. "The missing daughter of Blackmere. The dead daughter of Blackmere." Rowan's jaw tightened slightly. Someone wanted the world to believe that. Clara laughed softly then. The sound surprised both of them because there was no humor inside it. Only exhaustion. And they succeeded. Rowan studied her carefully. Not completely. Another silence stretched between them. Clara finally looked up. "You should let me leave." "No, Your Grace." No firmer this time. Clara frowned faintly. "Why?" Rowan glanced once toward the burned records surrounding them. "Because someone set fire to estate archives less than an hour after I discovered your identity." His voice lowered. "That is not coincidence." Clara wrapped her arms tighter around herself. "I survived before. As a servant hidden in an attic under false records." The words landed softly this time, almost carefully. "That protection is gone now." Clara hated how true that sounded. Rowan looked down briefly at the portrait again before offering it toward her. Clara accepted it carefully with trembling fingers. Smoke stains darkened one side, but the child's face remained untouched. "You look happy," Rowan said quietly. The observation hurt more than accusations ever could. Clara traced the edge of the burned canvas gently. "I barely remember her." Rowan watched her for a long moment. Something about the sight unsettled him unexpectedly. The girl standing before him looked composed almost all the time. Quiet, controlled, invisible by design. But holding that portrait stripped years away from her defenses. For one brief second she looked heartbreakingly young. "Who hid you?" he asked finally. Clara's expression shuddered immediately again. "I cannot tell you." "Why?" Fear crossed her face too quickly to hide. Rowan noticed. "Because they threatened someone." Clara stayed silent. He stepped closer carefully. "Clara, please stop asking. You are protecting someone." "Yes." Rowan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who?" She shook her head immediately. "I cannot." "Can or will not?" "Both." Rowan looked frustrated for the first time since entering the archive room. "You expect me to ignore attempted arson and hidden identities under my own roof?" Clara lifted tired eyes toward him. "I expect you to let this die before someone else gets hurt." Rowan stared at her. "That is not going to happen. You do not understand." "Then explain it to me." Clara opened her mouth once, closed it again. Fear swallowed the words before they formed. Rowan saw that too. "Whoever hid you taught obedience through fear." Clara looked away sharply. "You should not investigate this." "Too late." He moved toward the damaged shelves again, studying the burned cabinet slowly. "Someone buried a noble child 14 years ago." His voice darkened slightly. "And tonight they panicked enough to destroy records." Clara's fingers tightened around the portrait. "Please." Rowan turned back toward her. "What are you afraid of?" The answer escaped before she could stop it. That you will die next. Silence hit the archive room like ice. Rowan went completely still. Clara realized what she had admitted 1 second too late. Because frightened people did not warn strangers unless they already believed the threat was real. Rowan's expression changed slowly, cold calculation sharpening beneath his calm exterior. You know who did this? Clara stepped backward immediately. No, you do. I said no. Rowan moved toward her again. Clara. She retreated farther until cold stone pressed against her back near the archive wall. Please stop. Rowan halted instantly the moment he saw genuine panic flash across her face. Not fear of him. Fear of memories. Of consequences. Of names she refused to speak aloud. His voice lowered carefully. Nobody will touch you here. Clara almost smiled at the impossible promise. You cannot know that. Rowan held her gaze steadily. I can promise they will have to go through me first. The words settled heavily between them. Clara stared at him in silence because no one had said something like that to her in 14 years. Protection felt more dangerous than cruelty now. Cruelty was familiar. A sudden crash echoed somewhere upstairs above the archive ceiling. Both of them looked upward instantly. Footsteps followed. Running. Then Nathaniel's voice thundered down the corridor outside. Rowan. The Duke turned sharply toward the doorway. Nathaniel appeared seconds later, breathing hard. The portrait gallery. Rowan's expression hardened immediately. What about it? Nathaniel looked once toward Clara before answering quietly. Someone just removed every Whitmore painting from the north wing. The terrifying thing about buried history was not the secrets themselves. It was realizing how many people had spent years making sure those secrets stayed dead. The north gallery of Blackthorn Estate stretched nearly 100 feet beneath towering arched windows and dim chandeliers that flickered against polished black marble floors. Portraits lined both walls in heavy gold frames. Generals, judges, duchesses, dead men with sharp eyes and women wrapped in silk and diamonds. Except tonight, entire sections stood empty. Clara stopped moving the second she entered beside Rowan and Nathaniel. Pale rectangles marked the walls where paintings had hung only hours earlier. Torn wires dangled from exposed hooks. Dust floated through cold candlelight like drifting ash. How many are missing? Rowan asked quietly. Nathaniel scanned the empty spaces grimly. 6 confirmed. All Whitmore related. Clara's fingers tightened painfully around the burned portrait, still clutched against her chest. 6 paintings. Someone had not panicked randomly. Someone knew exactly which images mattered. Footsteps echoed behind them. Evelyn entered the gallery slowly, with Mrs. Aldridge following close behind. Several servants lingered farther back near the entrance, whispering nervously among themselves. Rowan's voice sharpened instantly. Clear the hallway. Everyone scattered immediately except Nathaniel and the women. Clara stared toward the largest empty frame near the center wall. She knew which portrait belonged there before she even stepped closer. Her mother. The realization hit before memory fully formed. A woman in dark blue silk standing beside winter roses beneath snowfall. Eleanor Whitmore. Clara's chest tightened so sharply it almost hurt to breathe. You recognize the placement, Rowan observed beside her. Clara closed her eyes briefly. I used to stand beneath that painting when I was little. Silence followed instantly. Evelyn crossed her arms tightly. So it is true. Clara looked away. Rowan's gaze remained fixed on the empty wall. Why would someone remove portraits now instead of years ago? Nathaniel answered first. Because nobody cared who she was until tonight. Rowan nodded once slowly. Exactly. Mrs. Aldridge stepped closer toward Clara carefully. You should sit down. Clara shook her head immediately. No, weakness felt dangerous now. Everything felt dangerous. Rowan moved farther along the gallery wall, studying the remaining portraits carefully. His expression hardened slightly. Not all of them are missing. Clara followed his gaze. One Whitmore painting remained untouched near the far end of the hall. Smaller than the others. A winter landscape. No visible figures. Rowan approached it slowly. Nathaniel frowned faintly. Why leave that one? Rowan's eyes narrowed. Because the painter hid something. Clara's pulse stumbled. Hidden. She knew that painting. Her father commissioned it during the final winter before the fire. Snow-covered trees beside a frozen lake beneath gray skies. Beautiful but strange because House Whitmore rarely displayed landscapes without family members inside them. Rowan reached toward the frame carefully. There. Nathaniel stepped beside him. What? Rowan pointed toward the lower corner. Nearly invisible beneath aged paint rested a tiny silver wolf crest. Smaller than a coin. Hidden deliberately. Clara stared at it in shock. My father painted that himself. Rowan looked back toward her immediately. Your father painted? Clara realized her mistake too late. Another detail she should not have revealed. Sometimes. Rowan studied her carefully again. You speak about him in present tense whenever you forget to be careful. Clara lowered her eyes instantly. I apologize. Stop apologizing for existing. The words left Rowan harsher than intended. Silence spread sharply through the gallery. Evelyn looked openly startled now. So did Clara. Rowan rarely sounded emotional about anything. He exhaled once slowly before turning back toward the painting. Remove it from the wall. Nathaniel hesitated briefly. You think something is hidden behind it? Yes. 2 footmen carefully lifted the painting away moments later. Behind it, embedded into dark wood paneling, rested a narrow iron compartment no larger than a jewelry box. Clara stopped breathing entirely. Rowan stared at the hidden compartment with cold understanding settling across his face. Interesting. Evelyn stepped closer. What is that? A wall safe. Rowan examined the lock mechanism. Old. Custom built. Clara's mind raced violently now. She had no memory of this. None. Nathaniel looked toward Rowan carefully. Should I force it open? Rowan glanced once toward Clara before answering. No, he stepped aside slightly. I think she should. Every eye in the gallery turned toward Clara instantly. Panic flickered through her chest. I do not know how. Rowan's expression remained unreadable. Try. Clara stared at the lock. Small silver dial. Frosted from age. Her pulse hammered harder beneath her ribs as distant memories stirred painfully behind her thoughts. A study. Warm candlelight. Her father kneeling beside a hidden wall compartment while smiling faintly. Every important family keeps one secret place, he had told her once. And every important family chooses carefully who learns how to open it. Clara's hands trembled slightly. No, impossible. She stepped closer slowly anyway. Rowan watched her with terrifying focus. Clara reached toward the silver dial carefully. Cold metal met colder fingertips. Think. Snow outside windows. Her mother laughing softly somewhere near the piano. Her father saying numbers slowly while she repeated them beside him. 7, 11, 4. Clara inhaled sharply. Her fingers moved automatically before conscious thought caught up. 7 clicks right. 11 left. For right again. A sharp metallic sound echoed through the gallery. The hidden compartment unlocked instantly. Silence crashed over the room. Evelyn looked almost pale now. Nathaniel swore softly beneath his breath. Rowan never looked away from Clara's face. You remembered. Clara stared at the open compartment like someone watching a ghost rise from water. Inside rested a bundle of letters wrapped carefully in dark ribbon. Beneath them sat a silver pocket watch engraved with crossed wolves. And at the very bottom, hidden beneath folded papers, lay a second signet ring identical to the one beneath Clara's bed upstairs. Her knees weakened slightly. Rowan stepped closer but did not touch anything immediately. May I? Clara nodded once silently. He lifted the letters carefully while Nathaniel moved nearer with a lantern. The first envelope bore faded handwriting across the front. To my daughter, should anything happen to us. Clara stopped breathing. Rowan looked toward her slowly. Your father wrote these. Clara's eyes burned suddenly. She hated that. Crying felt dangerous. Weak. But 14 years of buried grief pressed painfully against her ribs now and she could barely hold it back. Rowan noticed immediately. Sit down. I am fine. That was not a suggestion. His voice softened slightly after a beat. Please. Clara stared at him in surprise. Nobody said please to servants. Nobody looked at her like she mattered enough for gentleness. Slowly she lowered herself onto the velvet bench beneath the windows. Snow drifted softly beyond the glass now, turning the garden silver and pale outside. Rowan opened the first letter carefully. His eyes scanned several lines before his expression changed completely. Colder. Darker. What is it? Nathaniel asked quietly. Rowan looked toward Clara. Your father believed the fire was planned. Silence exploded through the gallery. Clara felt the floor disappear beneath her. No, Rowan handed the letter toward her. Read it. Her fingers shook violently now as she accepted the page. The handwriting hit her first. Familiar. Sharp, elegant script she had not seen since childhood. Clara, if you are reading this, then your mother and I failed to protect you. Dear God. Her vision blurred instantly. She forced herself onward. The fire was not accidental. Someone inside the Northern Council discovered the inheritance amendment before we could expose them. Trust nobody connected to Blackmere finances, especially not those closest to the family. Clara's heartbeat became deafening. Rowan watched her carefully. There is more. Clara swallowed hard and continued reading. If we cannot escape before morning, you must disappear completely. Your name will place you in danger until the truth is uncovered. The pocket watch contains the final ledger key. Trust only the man bearing the iron crest. Clara's hands froze instantly. Iron crest. Rowan noticed immediately. What? She looked up slowly toward him. The Ashbourne family crest carried an iron crown above crossed swords. Iron crest. Rowan's expression darkened with realization at the exact same moment. Nathaniel looked between them sharply. What does it mean? Before either of them could answer, glass shattered violently somewhere at the far end of the gallery. Clara jerked upright instinctively. Cold wind exploded through the corridor as servants screamed downstairs. Rowan spun instantly toward the sound. A gallery window near the western staircase hung broken open beneath swirling snow, and resting on the marble floor directly beneath it lay a single black envelope sealed with dark wax. Crossed wolves stamped across the front. Rowan crossed the gallery in seconds and picked it up carefully. The seal had been pressed recently. Fresh wax. Fresh threat. He opened the envelope once. Read the single line inside. Then his entire expression hardened into something lethal. Nathaniel stepped closer. Rowan. Slowly, Rowan lifted his eyes toward Clara. They know you are here. Clara's blood turned cold. Rowan handed the letter silently toward Nathaniel. The message contained only 7 words written in sharp black ink. The Whitmore girl should have stayed dead. Fear changed shape once someone finally believed you. Before that, it was loneliness. Afterward, it became the terrifying possibility of losing the person who stayed. Snow hammered against Blackthorn Estate through the rest of the night. Wind screamed through the broken gallery window while servants rushed to secure the shutters downstairs. Clara stood motionless beside the velvet bench with her father's letter still trembling faintly between her fingers. The Whitmore girl should have stayed dead. 7 words. Cold enough to freeze the air inside the room. Nathaniel folded the warning note carefully and looked toward Rowan. This is no longer hidden gossip. Rowan's expression remained carved from stone. No, Clara watched him silently. Most men would have looked frightened after receiving a direct threat tied to aristocratic conspiracies and attempted murder. Rowan Ashbourne only looked angry. Not loud anger. Worse, quiet anger. Controlled anger. The kind military men carried into battle. Evelyn wrapped her arms tightly around herself near the doorway. You need to inform the council immediately. Rowan looked toward her slowly. No, Rowan. No, firmer this time. If someone inside the Northern Council helped erase House Whitmore, then announcing Clara publicly would place her directly in their hands. Hearing her real name spoken naturally still unsettled Clara. Clara. Not servant. Not maid. Not invisible girl. Evelyn stepped closer. You cannot seriously intend to keep her here. I intend to keep her alive. The room fell silent. Clara lowered her eyes immediately because something inside her chest tightened painfully at the words. Nobody had spoken about her survival like it mattered before. Nathaniel crossed toward the shattered gallery window carefully. The messenger escaped through the western grounds. Rowan's gaze sharpened. Tracks. Snow covered most of them already. Nathaniel hesitated briefly, but the rider knew the estate layout. Rowan looked back toward the others slowly. Meaning whoever sent the message either worked here once or received information from someone inside Blackthorn. Silence settled heavily again. Evelyn's expression shifted instantly. You think there is a spy in the estate? I think, Rowan said coldly. Someone reacted far too quickly to Clara's identity becoming known. Mrs. Aldridge stepped closer toward Clara protectively. Rowan noticed that too. He noticed everything. How many people knew before tonight? He asked quietly. Mrs. Aldridge answered carefully. Very few. Names. Clara spoke before the housekeeper could. No, Rowan turned toward her immediately. No, I will not drag innocent people into this. And if they are already involved? Clara's pulse quickened. They protected me. Perhaps. Rowan stepped closer. Or perhaps they controlled you. The words landed hard because some part of Clara feared he might be right. 14 years of hidden rooms. False names. Locked doors. Instructions whispered in fear. Protection and imprisonment often looked frighteningly similar. Rowan studied her expression carefully. You never questioned why you were hidden. Clara laughed softly under her breath. Exhausted. Bitter. Children who survive disasters do not ask many questions. Something changed behind Rowan's eyes at that. A flicker of understanding, perhaps. He knew war. He knew what fear did to children. Nathaniel finally broke the silence. We should move her. Clara stiffened immediately. No. Rowan frowned faintly. Why? Because running is exactly what they expect. Rowan stared at her for one long second. Then unexpectedly, something almost approving crossed his face. Interesting. Evelyn looked openly frustrated now. You cannot honestly encourage this. Rowan ignored her completely. His eyes remained fixed on Clara. You think standing your ground gives you leverage. Clara swallowed carefully. I think disappearing again means they win. Silence followed. Rowan's gaze sharpened slightly. There she is. Clara frowned faintly. What? The real woman beneath the servant mask. Her breath caught softly. Nobody had ever spoken to her that way before. Like there was something beneath the invisible girl worth uncovering. Evelyn noticed it too. Jealousy darkened her expression immediately. This is dangerous, she said sharply. The estate is already crawling with gossip. Rowan's tone cooled another degree. Then let them gossip. About a duke protecting a servant girl? About me protecting a witness connected to attempted murder. Evelyn stared at him. You are becoming emotionally involved. The accusation settled heavily through the gallery. Clara looked away instantly. Rowan's expression became unreadable. No, Evelyn did not look convinced. Neither was Clara. Because Rowan Ashbourne kept doing things powerful men did not do for servants. He noticed when she was frightened. He asked instead of commanded sometimes. He stood between her and danger without hesitation. Men like him were not supposed to care whether invisible girls survived. Rowan turned toward Nathaniel again. Double guards on the west grounds. No servant leaves the estate until morning. Nathaniel nodded immediately and disappeared into the corridor. Evelyn exhaled sharply through her nose. You are turning Blackthorn into a fortress over one woman. Rowan's voice remained calm. Someone already tried arson tonight. And perhaps that someone simply wanted the records destroyed. Then why send a threat afterward? Evelyn had no answer for that. Rowan crossed toward the hidden wall compartment again, and carefully lifted the silver pocket watch Clara's father left behind. You said the watch contains a ledger key. Clara nodded faintly. That is what the letter said. Rowan examined the engraved surface beneath candlelight. Open it. Clara hesitated. I do not know how. Try. Again. Always that word with him. Try. As though he expected her to remember things buried beneath years of fear. Slowly Clara accepted the watch from his hand. Cold silver rested against trembling fingers. Her father used to carry it everywhere. She remembered that now. The steady ticking sound during carriage rides. The faint smell of cedar oil clinging to the chain. Clara pressed carefully against the side latch. Nothing happened. She frowned faintly. Rowan watched her quietly. Think. Clara closed her eyes. Think. Winter garden. Snow. Her father kneeling beside her while laughing softly. Not all locks open from the obvious side. Little wolf. Little wolf. Dear God. Clara inhaled sharply and turned the watch over instead. Hidden beneath the back engraving rested a nearly invisible second latch. She pressed it carefully. Click. The watch opened instantly. Inside, beneath the clockwork mechanism, rested a tiny folded paper no larger than a postage stamp. Nathaniel returned at that exact moment carrying a lantern. The grounds are secure. He stopped when he noticed the open watch. Rowan accepted the folded paper carefully and held it beneath the light. Numbers. Coordinates. Ledger references. Nathaniel frowned immediately. Financial codes. Rowan's expression darkened slightly while scanning the tiny writing. Not just financial. Clara looked toward him. What is it? Rowan lifted his eyes slowly. Names. Silence spread sharply through the gallery. Whose names? Rowan folded the paper once carefully. Council members. Land magistrates. Banking families. His voice lowered dangerously. And payment records beside all of them. Nathaniel swore quietly beneath his breath. Evelyn looked suddenly pale. Blackmail. Rowan shook his head slowly. Bribery. Clara felt cold all over again. My father discovered corruption. Your father, Rowan corrected quietly, appears to have uncovered an entire political network buying Northern inheritance decisions. Nathaniel crossed his arms tightly. If these names become public, half the aristocracy could collapse. Rowan looked toward Clara again. Which explains why someone burned an estate to erase the evidence. Clara stared at the floor beneath her boots. Her entire childhood suddenly felt different now. Not tragic accident. Not random fire. Murder hidden behind wealth and titles. Rowan watched her carefully. How much do you remember about that night? Clara's heartbeat slowed strangely. Numbness settling where panic had been. Smoke. Her voice sounded distant even to herself. My mother screaming upstairs. The gallery went completely silent. Men arguing downstairs. She swallowed hard. Someone said my father refused to sign something. Rowan's expression sharpened immediately. What else? Clara closed her eyes. Fragments returned painfully now. Firelight across marble floors. A silver ring glinting beside dark gloves. Her father shoving papers into the pocket watch while shouting at someone she could not see. Run. Dear God. He told me to run. Rowan stepped closer instinctively. Clara. She opened her eyes again quickly before memories swallowed her whole. There was another man. Who? I never saw his face. Her voice trembled slightly. But he wore a ring with a black stone. Nathaniel looked toward Rowan immediately. Rowan's jaw hardened. Northern Council signet. Evelyn stared sharply between them. You know who that is. Rowan said nothing. Silence answered loudly enough. Clara felt dread twist hard inside her chest. You know. Rowan looked toward the snow-covered windows instead of answering immediately. There were 6 original council founders overseeing Blackmere territory 14 years ago. His voice turned colder with each word. 5 are still alive. Clara's stomach dropped. And the 6th. Rowan finally looked back toward her. My father. Silence crashed through the gallery so violently Clara almost stopped breathing. Evelyn went completely still near the doorway. Nathaniel closed his eyes briefly like a man watching disaster arrive exactly as expected. Clara stared at Rowan in shock. No, Rowan's expression remained unreadable now. Too controlled. Too calm. My father served on the Northern Council during the Blackmere fire. Clara stepped backward instinctively. Rowan noticed immediately. Pain flickered across his face before disappearing behind restraint. Clara, you said the Iron Crest meant I could trust someone. Her voice sounded hollow. What if the letter meant your father? Rowan did not answer fast enough. That silence terrified her more than words. Clara's pulse pounded violently now. Dear God. Rowan moved toward her slowly. Listen to me. Your family was involved. Perhaps. Her composure finally cracked. People died. Rowan's voice sharpened instantly. And I intend to find out who caused it. How? Clara whispered. If your own father sat on that council. Rowan stopped only inches away now. Close enough that she could see exhaustion buried beneath his calm exterior. Because my father died 10 years ago. Silence fell. Rowan's gray eyes held hers steadily. And before he died, he said quietly, he spent the last 3 years of his life trying to expose someone powerful enough to terrify him. Clara stared at him in shock. Rowan reached slowly inside his coat and withdrew a second folded letter. Old, worn, sealed with black wax already cracked by time. I found this among my father's private papers after his funeral. He handed it toward her carefully. Clara accepted it with trembling fingers. The handwriting across the front made her blood run cold instantly. Elias Whitmore, her father's name. Rowan's voice lowered almost to a whisper. Your father sent my father a warning 3 days before the fire. Sometimes trust did not begin with love. Sometimes it began with discovering 2 fathers died trying to warn each other. Snow still covered the windows of the North Gallery when silence finally broke beneath the weight of Rowan's confession. Clara stared down at the worn letter in her hands while her pulse echoed painfully inside her ears. Elias Whitmore, her father's handwriting across the front. Addressed to Rowan's father. Everything she believed about Blackmere kept changing shape faster than she could understand it. Read it, Rowan said quietly. Clara unfolded the letter slowly. The paper had yellowed with age. Several corners were worn soft from being handled too many times. Dear Jonathan, if you are reading this, then matters have already worsened beyond repair. I was correct about the inheritance accounts. Several council members are moving money through false widow estates and orphan land transfers. They believe I intend to expose them publicly before Parliament reviews the Northern Territories next season. Eleanor wants us to leave England immediately. I should have listened sooner. If anything happens to my family, protect Clara. She is innocent in this. Clara stopped breathing. Protect Clara. Her vision blurred suddenly. She swallowed hard and forced herself onward. I no longer know which men inside the council can be trusted. But I know this. Someone is willing to kill over these records. Burn this letter after reading. Elias. Silence swallowed the gallery completely. Clara stared at the final line while emotion pressed painfully against her ribs. Her father had known. He knew danger was coming and still failed to escape it. Rowan watched her carefully across the candlelit room. My father never burned the letter. Clara lifted her eyes slowly. Why not? Rowan looked toward the snow beyond the windows. Because 2 nights after receiving it, Blackmere burned. His voice lowered slightly. And by the time my father arrived, there was nothing left except ashes and bodies. Clara closed her eyes briefly. She remembered smoke, cold air, someone carrying her through trees while the estate behind her disappeared beneath firelight. She remembered screaming for her mother until rough hands covered her mouth. Who saved me? She whispered. Rowan shook his head once. I do not know yet. Nathaniel crossed his arms near the hidden wall compartment. But whoever removed her from Blackmere wanted her hidden alive. Evelyn laughed softly beneath her breath. Sharp, nervous, or useful later. Clara looked toward her immediately. Evelyn met her gaze coolly. You inherited more than a family name. If the Whitmore records are legitimate, then you may control half the northern trade routes connected to Blackmere lands. Clara blinked faintly. I do not care about land. That does not matter, Evelyn replied. Powerful men will. Rowan's expression darkened instantly. Enough. Evelyn stiffened slightly. I am being realistic. You are frightening her unnecessarily. Clara looked away quickly. Frightened, yes, but not because of land or money. She was frightened because every hour brought another truth sharp enough to destroy whatever remained of her old life. Rowan stepped toward the gallery fire and added another log carefully. Warm light spread slowly across the marble floor. The council will hear rumors by morning, Nathaniel said quietly. The servants already know something happened. Rowan nodded once. Then we move before gossip becomes public speculation. Clara frowned faintly. Move where? Rowan turned toward her. You are no longer working as a servant. The words hit harder than expected. Clara stared at him in silence. A servant. That identity had protected her for 14 years. It was humiliating sometimes, lonely often, but safe, invisible. I should continue working, she said quietly. No, Your Grace. No, firm again. Final. Clara lowered her gaze. People will notice. They already noticed. Rowan's voice softened slightly after a beat. You cannot return to scrubbing floors after tonight. Clara wrapped her arms tightly around herself. That life is all I know now. Something painful flickered briefly across Rowan's face before disappearing behind restraint. No, he said quietly. It is simply the life you survived. Silence settled between them again. Evelyn watched the exchange with growing tension. Nathaniel noticed too. Everyone noticed. Rowan Ashbourne looked at Clara Whitmore differently now. Not like a servant. Not even like a witness. Like someone whose safety mattered personally. Clara felt it every time his voice softened unexpectedly around her. That terrified her more than the threats. What happens now? She asked carefully. Rowan studied her for one long second before answering. Now we uncover who destroyed your family. Clara exhaled shakily. And if the council comes here first? Rowan's expression cooled instantly. Then they will discover Blackthorn is difficult to intimidate. Nathaniel almost smiled faintly at that. That is one way to phrase it. A sudden gust of wind rattled the gallery windows sharply. Clara flinched before she could stop herself. Rowan noticed immediately. He crossed toward her without hesitation and removed his heavy black coat. You are freezing. Clara shook her head quickly. I am fine. Rowan ignored her completely and settled the coat carefully around her shoulders anyway. Warmth surrounded her instantly. Cedar smoke. Winter air. Faint traces of leather and snow. Clara's breath caught softly. No man had ever done something so gentle for her before. Rowan stepped back immediately afterward as though realizing the intimacy of it 1 second too late. Evelyn saw that too. Her expression hardened. You cannot seriously intend to keep her in the attic tonight. Rowan looked toward her sharply. Absolutely not. Clara opened her mouth instantly. Please. Rowan turned back toward her. No locked rooms. No servant quarters. I do not belong upstairs. You belong somewhere safe. The certainty in his voice unsettled her completely. Clara looked away before he could notice how deeply the words affected her. Nathaniel cleared his throat carefully. There is another issue. Rowan's gaze shifted toward him. What? Nathaniel hesitated briefly. The remaining council members are gathering tomorrow evening at Hawthorne Manor. Rowan's expression sharpened instantly. Already? Apparently Lord Carrington requested an emergency meeting after hearing rumors about archive theft. Clara's stomach tightened painfully. Rowan moved toward the fire again slowly. Thinking. Calculating. They move too quickly, Nathaniel murmured. Which means they are frightened, Rowan answered. Evelyn crossed her arms tightly. You cannot bring her anywhere near that meeting. Rowan looked toward Clara again. Candlelight flickered across the sharp lines of his face while snow drifted endlessly outside the gallery windows behind him. No, he said slowly. But perhaps they should see her eventually. Clara stared at him in alarm. Absolutely not. Rowan's eyes remained fixed on hers. Fear works both ways, Clara. You do not understand these people. No, Rowan corrected quietly. I understand them perfectly. The room fell silent again, because everyone inside it knew Rowan Ashbourne was one of them. Aristocratic, ruthless when necessary, raised among powerful men capable of burying scandals beneath money and titles. If he decided to wage war against the Northern Council, he would not do it gently. Clara suddenly realized how dangerous he truly was. Not physically, politically, emotionally. Men like Rowan did not lose once they committed themselves to something. And somehow he had committed himself to her survival with terrifying certainty. Mrs. Aldridge finally stepped forward from the doorway where she had remained mostly silent. The East guest chambers are prepared. Clara looked immediately toward her. Guest chambers? Temporary, Rowan said before she could protest. Near my private wing. Clara's pulse quickened instantly. Evelyn looked openly horrified now. Rowan. She will be guarded. People will talk. Let them. His voice turned colder. Any servant spreading gossip will leave Blackthorn by morning. Silence followed sharply. Nobody argued further after that tone. Rowan glanced toward the grandfather clock near the gallery entrance. Nearly 3 in the morning. Nathaniel, he said quietly, send riders to London at dawn. I want every surviving Blackmere record located before the council reaches them first. Nathaniel nodded immediately. Rowan continued, and discreetly investigate which council members recently contacted Blackthorn staff. You suspect an insider. I suspect several. Clara watched him issue orders with calm authority while something strange shifted quietly inside her chest. For years survival meant hiding, staying small, staying silent. Tonight one powerful man stood between her and an entire conspiracy without hesitation. She did not know what to do with that kind of protection. Felt too large, too dangerous. Rowan turned toward her again. You should rest. Clara nodded faintly. Exhaustion pressed heavily behind her eyes now. Rowan crossed the gallery and stopped beside her once more. Clara. She looked up carefully. His gray eyes softened slightly beneath the candlelight. No one will lock your door tonight. The words nearly broke her composure completely, because he understood. Somehow he understood the humiliation of that lock without her ever fully explaining it. Clara lowered her eyes quickly before emotion showed across her face. Thank you. Rowan held her gaze another second too long. Then footsteps echoed suddenly from the far corridor outside the gallery. Fast. Urgent. A young footman appeared breathless at the doorway. Your Grace. Rowan turned sharply. What now? The boy swallowed hard. There is a woman downstairs asking for Miss Whitmore. Silence crashed instantly through the gallery. Clara's blood turned cold. Rowan's expression hardened. Name. The footman hesitated. She says her name is Margaret Vale. Clara stopped breathing entirely. Margaret Vale. The woman who disappeared the night Blackmere burned. The woman who carried Clara through the snow while the estate died behind them. The woman who was supposed to be dead. The dead did not return quietly. They arrived carrying every answer you were never supposed to survive long enough to hear. Clara could not move. Margaret Vale. The name echoed through her mind like something torn from a nightmare buried too deep for memory to reach clearly. Rowan noticed the color drain from her face immediately. You know her. Clara nodded once. Barely. She took me from Blackmere. Silence spread sharply through the gallery. Nathaniel looked toward Rowan at once. Evelyn stepped backward slowly beneath the chandelier light as though instinct warned her something enormous had just entered Blackthorn Estate. Rowan's expression hardened into cold focus. Bring her to the west drawing room, he ordered the footman. And search her first. Yes, Your Grace. The servant disappeared immediately. Clara's pulse hammered painfully now. Margaret Vale had vanished 14 years ago. No letters. No visits. No explanation. Only instructions whispered into frightened ears before abandoning Clara under false names and locked rooms. Mrs. Aldridge crossed closer carefully. Sit down before you fall. Clara realized suddenly her knees were shaking. Rowan noticed too. Nathaniel. Already done. Nathaniel moved toward the doorway. I will secure the corridor. Soon only Rowan, Clara, Mrs. Aldridge, and Evelyn remained inside the gallery. Snow drifted endlessly beyond the shattered windows while the fire crackled low beside the hidden wall compartment. Clara stared at the floor, trying to steady her breathing. You thought she was dead, Rowan said quietly. Clara swallowed hard. She disappeared after bringing me north. Did she tell you who she was? No, anything. Clara closed her eyes briefly. Fragments returned in painful flashes. A black carriage racing through snow. Rough blankets wrapped around her shoulders. Margaret whispering, Do not tell anyone your real name. Clara shook her head faintly. Only that I had to stay hidden. Evelyn crossed her arms tightly. Convenient. Rowan's gray eyes cut sharply toward her. Enough. I am not accusing the girl. Evelyn's voice sharpened slightly. But this woman vanishes for 14 years and suddenly appears the exact night Clara's identity surfaces? Rowan said nothing, which meant he agreed. Clara understood the suspicion too. Fear settled deeper inside her chest, because some part of her wondered the same thing. Mrs. Aldridge touched Clara's shoulder gently. Whatever happens downstairs, you are not 8 years old anymore. Clara almost laughed softly at that, because part of her still felt 8 every time Blackmere returned. Rowan crossed toward her slowly. You do not have to face her alone. Clara lifted her eyes toward him. Candlelight sharpened every hard line across his face while snow drifted behind him like pale ash. He looked dangerous, controlled, entirely capable of terrifying powerful men. And somehow his presence made breathing easier. That frightened her too. Why are you helping me? The question escaped quietly before she could stop it. Rowan paused. Not because he lacked answers. Because perhaps he had too many. Because someone should have years ago. The words settled heavily between them. Clara looked away quickly before emotion betrayed itself across her face. No one had ever spoken to her with that kind of certainty before. Like her suffering had been wrong instead of necessary. Rowan studied her another moment before turning toward the door. Come. The west drawing room sat near Rowan's private wing on the second floor. Smaller than the grand salons below but warmer somehow. Dark green walls. Low firelight. Thick velvet curtains blocking the snow outside. Clara stopped breathing the second she entered. A woman stood beside the fireplace wrapped in a worn dark cloak dusted white from snow. Older now. Gray threaded through chestnut hair pulled tightly back beneath a bonnet. Thin from years of hardship, but unmistakable. Margaret Vale. The woman turned slowly at the sound of the door opening. Her eyes found Clara instantly, and shattered. Dear God, she whispered. Clara stood frozen near the entrance while 14 years collapsed painfully between one heartbeat and the next. Margaret crossed the room quickly before stopping herself halfway there like someone afraid touch might break the illusion. You are alive. Clara stared at her. You left me. The words landed harder than anger. Margaret flinched visibly. Rowan remained near the doorway watching everything with terrifying stillness. Nathaniel stood behind him beside 2 armed guards. Nobody trusted coincidences anymore. Margaret looked toward Clara again with tears already filling her eyes. I never wanted to leave you. But you did. Silence spread through the room. Firelight flickered softly across dark wood walls while snow tapped against the windows outside. Margaret lowered her gaze briefly. I thought keeping distance would protect you. Clara laughed softly beneath her breath. Hurt, exhausted. That sentence ruined my entire life. Rowan's expression shifted slightly at that. Margaret looked devastated. Clara. No, Clara stepped backward once instinctively. You disappeared. Because they were searching for you. Who? Margaret hesitated. Rowan noticed immediately. Answer her. His voice remained calm. That made it worse. Margaret glanced toward him carefully. The Northern Council. Rowan crossed his arms slowly. Names. I never saw all their faces. But you saw some. Margaret swallowed hard. Lord Carrington. Silence hit the room sharply. Nathaniel swore softly under his breath. Rowan's expression became ice-cold. Clara frowned faintly. Who is that? Evelyn answered quietly from near the back wall where she had remained unusually silent. Chairman of the Northern Inheritance Council. Margaret nodded weakly. He discovered Elias Whitmore collected records against them. Clara's stomach tightened painfully. My father. Margaret looked toward her with unbearable sadness. Your father tried to protect dozens of families from losing their land. The council had been stealing inheritance estates for years. Rowan's jaw hardened. Through falsified deaths and manipulated claims. Margaret looked startled. You know already. Enough. Clara stared at the fire while pieces of her childhood rearranged themselves again. The fire was never about one family. No, Margaret whispered. It was about hiding financial crimes tied to half the northern aristocracy. Silence settled heavily through the drawing room. Rowan moved closer toward Margaret carefully. Why come here now? Fear flickered instantly across the woman's face. Because they know Clara survived. We established that already. Rowan's voice sharpened slightly. Why risk exposing yourself tonight? Margaret's hands trembled visibly now. Because another witness is alive. Every person in the room went still. Rowan's gaze narrowed dangerously. Who? Margaret looked directly at Clara. Your mother's brother. Clara stopped breathing entirely. Uncle Henry? Margaret nodded once. He survived the fire. Tears burned suddenly behind Clara's eyes. Another impossible thing. Another ghost returning from ashes. No, she whispered. We were told he died in London years ago. That was the story arranged by the council. Rowan stepped forward immediately. Where is he now? Margaret hesitated again. Too long. Rowan noticed instantly. Margaret. She looked genuinely frightened now. Hidden. Where? I cannot say here. Rowan's expression darkened dangerously. You walked into my estate asking for protection while withholding information. Because someone followed me. Silence exploded through the room. Nathaniel reached for the pistol beneath his coat immediately. Rowan went completely still. Explain. Margaret looked toward the windows instinctively. I saw riders behind my carriage for nearly 20 miles through the snow. Clara's pulse quickened violently. Rowan moved toward the curtains and pulled them aside sharply. Snowstorms blurred most of the estate grounds into darkness beyond the glass. But movement flickered briefly near the outer gates. Horse lanterns. Nathaniel saw them too. Damn it! Rowan's voice turned lethal. How many? At least 4 riders. Nathaniel crossed toward the guards instantly. Secure every entrance. The men disappeared immediately. Evelyn looked pale now. They followed her here. Margaret nodded shakily. I tried losing them twice. Rowan released the curtain slowly. His face had become terrifyingly calm again. The kind of calm soldiers carried seconds before battle. Clara wrapped Rowan's coat tighter around herself without realizing it. Fear crawled beneath her skin now. Not for herself. For everyone inside Blackthorn. You should send me away, she whispered. Rowan turned toward her instantly. No. This is happening because of me. This, Rowan said coldly, has been happening since long before you arrived here. Another knock interrupted sharply at the drawing room door. Nathaniel opened it immediately. A guard entered breathing hard from the cold. Your Grace. Rowan looked toward him. What? A carriage just arrived at the front gates. Silence spread instantly again. Rowan frowned. At this hour? Yes, sir. The guard hesitated briefly. The passenger claims urgent business regarding Miss Whitmore. Clara's stomach dropped. Rowan's expression hardened. Name. The guard swallowed once. Lord Carrington. The worst monsters rarely arrived screaming. They arrived smiling politely at the front door while asking permission to come inside. Silence crushed the drawing room after the guard spoke Lord Carrington's name. Clara felt every ounce of warmth vanish from her body instantly. Margaret Vale looked genuinely terrified for the first time since arriving at Blackthorn. Rowan Ashbourne did not look frightened at all. He looked dangerous. "How many men came with him?" Rowan asked quietly. "6 riders, Your Grace." Nathaniel muttered softly beneath his breath. "Too many for a social visit." Rowan's gaze never left the doorway. "Where is he now?" "Waiting in the front hall." Rowan nodded once slowly. "Calm. Controlled. Lethal. Keep him waiting." The guard disappeared immediately. Evelyn crossed her arms tightly. "You cannot refuse him entry forever. I only need 10 minutes. Rowan turned sharply toward Nathaniel. "Lock down the east wing. No servant enters or leaves without clearance." Nathaniel nodded instantly. "Done." Rowan's eyes shifted toward Margaret. "You said Carrington helped orchestrate the Whitmore cover-up." Margaret swallowed hard. "Yes. Can you prove it?" Fear flickered across her face. "Not publicly." Rowan's expression hardened. "Then privately." Margaret hesitated. "There are ledgers." Clara's pulse quickened instantly. "The same ledgers my father hid?" Margaret nodded faintly. "Your Uncle Henry kept copies." Rowan stepped closer immediately. "Where?" "I cannot tell you until Clara is safe." Rowan's jaw tightened slightly. "She is standing inside the most heavily guarded estate in northern England." Margaret shook her head quickly. "You do not understand Carrington." Rowan's voice cooled another degree. "Then explain him to me." Margaret stared into the fire as though trying to force herself through old fear. "He does not threaten people directly. He destroys reputations first. Wealth second. Lives last." Clara wrapped Rowan's coat tighter around herself unconsciously. She remembered almost nothing about Lord Carrington except fragments. Tall shadow beside her father's study door. A black stone ring catching firelight. A voice that always sounded calm even while other adults looked frightened around him. Rowan noticed the fear crossing her face immediately. "Clara." She looked toward him slowly. "Did you ever see Carrington at Blackmere?" Memories flickered painfully. "Once." Her voice trembled slightly. "The night before the fire." Silence spread sharply through the room. Nathaniel looked toward Rowan immediately. "That confirms involvement." Evelyn stepped away from the wall at last. "You still cannot openly accuse the chairman of the Northern Council without proof." Rowan's gaze shifted toward her. "Who said anything about accusing him tonight?" Evelyn frowned faintly. "Then what exactly are you planning?" Rowan looked toward the fire again. "I want to see how badly he panics." Clara stared at him carefully now. There was something terrifying about the way he thought. Cold. Strategic. Like a man positioning soldiers before battle. Rowan turned toward her again. "When Carrington enters this room, you will say nothing unless I ask you directly." Clara nodded faintly. "All right. Do not let him see fear." Clara almost laughed softly at the impossible request. Rowan noticed. "Can you do that?" She lifted tired gray eyes toward him. "I survived 14 years pretending not to exist." Something dark and approving flickered briefly across his expression. "Good." A servant entered moments later carrying a silver tea tray with trembling hands. Nobody touched it. The room felt too tense for ordinary human things now. Clara stood near the fire while snow battered the windows behind heavy velvet curtains. Rowan remained beside the mantel clock, one gloved hand resting lightly against the marble as though completely relaxed. He was not relaxed. Clara understood that now. Men like Rowan became quieter the more dangerous situations grew. Nathaniel finally spoke. "If Carrington already knows Clara survived, then the council likely knows too." Rowan nodded once. "Probably. Then tomorrow's emergency meeting is no longer routine." "No," Rowan's voice lowered slightly. "Tomorrow they will decide whether Clara becomes a political inconvenience or a public threat." Clara felt cold all over again. Evelyn looked toward her sharply. "You should leave England immediately." Rowan answered before Clara could. "No," Evelyn exhaled sharply. "Rowan. If Clara disappears now, The council controls the narrative permanently. His eyes settled briefly on Clara. And they bury the truth again. Silence followed. Because everyone knew he was right. Rowan crossed slowly toward the drinks cabinet near the fireplace and poured a glass of whiskey without looking away from the room. Nathaniel. Yes. How many loyal men do we still have inside Parliament? Nathaniel frowned slightly. Enough to cause trouble. Good. Clara stared at Rowan in surprise. You are planning something. Rowan handed the whiskey toward Margaret instead. The older woman accepted it with shaking hands. I am planning several things. Evelyn looked openly alarmed now. Do not start a war with the Northern Council over one inheritance dispute. Rowan's gaze cut sharply toward her. This stopped being about inheritance the moment people started burning estates with children inside. Silence crashed through the room. Evelyn looked away first. A loud knock echoed suddenly from downstairs beneath the drawing room floor. Then another. Slow. Deliberate. Clara's stomach tightened painfully. Carrington. Rowan looked toward the door calmly. Show him in. Nathaniel moved immediately while the guards straightened near the walls. Margaret looked close to panic now. Clara noticed and stepped nearer instinctively. The older woman grabbed her hand quickly. Do not trust his kindness. Clara squeezed her fingers once gently. I remember enough. Rowan saw the exchange but said nothing. Seconds later, the drawing room doors opened. Lord Theodore Carrington entered like a man entirely comfortable walking into enemy territory. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a charcoal wool coat untouched by snow despite the storm outside. One black stone ring gleamed beneath candlelight on his right hand. Clara stopped breathing instantly. Memory crashed through her violently. Firelight reflecting across that ring while adults shouted somewhere downstairs. Carrington's gaze found her immediately, and smiled. Well, he said softly. This is unexpected. Rowan did not move from the fireplace. You arrived uninvited. Carrington removed his gloves calmly. I heard rumors difficult to ignore. His eyes returned toward Clara with chilling familiarity. Especially regarding a dead girl. Clara forced herself not to retreat. Rowan noticed the effort instantly. State your business. Carrington looked amused by the hostility. Direct as always, Ashbourne. He crossed farther into the room slowly while the guards watched carefully from both walls. I merely wish to confirm certain gossip before tomorrow's council gathering. Rowan's expression remained carved from ice. You traveled through a blizzard at 3 in the morning for gossip? Carrington smiled faintly. Some rumors reshape governments. Silence stretched sharply. Carrington finally stopped several feet from Clara. Too close. Her pulse quickened painfully. You resemble your mother more every year. Clara's blood turned cold. Rowan stepped between them instantly. Smooth, silent, protective. Carrington noticed that too. Interest flickered briefly across his face. Interesting. Rowan's voice lowered dangerously. Speak carefully. Carrington looked almost entertained now. You misunderstand me entirely. Do I? Carrington folded his gloves slowly beneath one arm. I knew Elias Whitmore. Clara stared at him. My father feared you. The words escaped before she could stop them. Silence exploded through the room. Nathaniel went completely still beside the door. Evelyn looked horrified. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. Carrington studied Clara for one long second. Then smiled sadly enough to appear almost sincere. Your father feared many things near the end. Rowan's jaw hardened immediately. Enough games. Carrington finally turned toward him. Very well. His expression cooled slightly. The Northern Council knows Clara Whitmore survived. Clara's stomach dropped. Rowan did not react visibly at all. And several members want her delivered into protective custody before Parliament becomes involved. Nathaniel laughed once under his breath. Protective custody. Carrington ignored him completely. His eyes remained fixed on Rowan now. The council believes her testimony could destabilize Northern inheritance claims. Rowan's voice turned cold enough to freeze the room. How unfortunate for them. Carrington's expression sharpened slightly for the first time. Do not mistake political caution for weakness, Ashbourne. Rowan stepped forward once. Not threatening. Worse, calm. Do not mistake my patience for cooperation. Silence crashed hard between the two men. Clara suddenly understood something terrifying. They were equals, powerful enough to challenge each other openly without raising their voices once. Carrington glanced toward Clara again. You should know your father was not entirely innocent. Rowan's expression darkened instantly. Careful. But Carrington continued smoothly. Elias Whitmore threatened to expose half the council unless they surrendered certain land contracts back to local families. Clara frowned faintly. That sounds honorable. Something almost approving flickered across Rowan's face at her response. Carrington noticed that too. Idealistic, he corrected softly. Men with power rarely surrender it peacefully. Rowan's tone sharpened. Get to the point. Carrington exhaled slowly. Very well. He looked directly at Clara. Your survival places every council family in danger. Clara lifted her chin carefully despite the fear pressing through her chest. Perhaps they should have behaved differently 14 years ago. Silence followed instantly. Nathaniel looked impressed. Evelyn looked stunned. Rowan's gray eyes shifted toward Clara with unmistakable approval now. Carrington smiled again. Smaller this time. Colder. You sound exactly like your father. Rowan stepped closer beside Clara without looking away from Carrington. The conversation is over. Carrington remained still another second. Then his gaze drifted briefly toward Margaret near the fire. Recognition flashed instantly across his face. Real surprise this time. Margaret Vale. Margaret looked pale but held his gaze. Lord Carrington. Carrington's smile vanished completely. Now this, he said softly, is dangerous. Rowan noticed immediately. You did not know she survived. Carrington recovered fast. Too fast. I assumed she fled overseas years ago. Margaret's hands trembled slightly. You hoped. Carrington ignored her. His eyes returned slowly toward Rowan. Tomorrow's council meeting begins at 7 in the evening. Rowan said nothing. Carrington adjusted one cuff calmly. Bring the girl. Silence exploded through the room. Clara's pulse stumbled violently. Rowan's voice turned lethal. No, Carrington met his gaze evenly. If Clara Whitmore does not appear willingly, the council will interpret that as hostility. Rowan stepped closer another inch. Perhaps hostility is overdue. Carrington smiled faintly again. Careful, Ashbourne. His eyes flicked once toward Clara. Wars that begin over women rarely end cleanly. Rowan's entire expression darkened. Get out of my house. Carrington held his gaze another second too long, then finally inclined his head slightly toward Clara. Until tomorrow, Miss Whitmore. The doors closed behind him moments later. Silence swallowed the drawing room completely. Then Nathaniel exhaled slowly. That man terrifies me. Rowan never looked away from the closed doors. Good. Clara stared at him carefully. You are going to that meeting. Rowan turned toward her slowly. Candlelight flickered across cold gray eyes already deciding outcomes before anyone else understood the game fully. No, he said quietly. We are. The moment a powerful man says, we instead of you, the entire world changes shape around the woman he chose to stand beside. Clara did not sleep. Dawn arrived over Blackthorn Estate in pale silver light while snow buried the gardens beneath thick white drifts and servants whispered nervously through the hallways below. Everyone knew something had changed inside the manor overnight. Guards doubled at every entrance. Riders came and went before sunrise carrying sealed letters south toward London. And for the first time in nearly 2 years, Clara Whitmore no longer woke inside the locked attic room above the servant quarters. Instead, she stood silently near the tall windows of the east guest chamber wrapped in one of Rowan Ashbourne's dark wool blankets while staring across frozen gardens touched by morning frost. The room felt impossibly large. Velvet curtains, carved fireplace, a bed softer than anything she remembered from childhood. It did not feel like safety. It felt temporary, dangerous, like standing inside someone else's life. A knock sounded softly behind her. Clara turned immediately. Rowan entered without waiting for permission. Black coat, gloves already on, controlled exhaustion shadowing his face beneath the cold morning light. He had not slept either. "You should eat something," he said quietly. Clara looked back toward the snow outside. "I am not hungry." Rowan crossed toward the breakfast tray untouched beside the fire. "You have said that 3 times since last night." Clara said nothing. Rowan studied her silently another moment. "You are frightened." She almost smiled faintly. "That is becoming repetitive." Something softer flickered briefly across his expression. "Good. Humor means you are still thinking clearly." Clara finally looked toward him fully. "Do you always prepare for war this calmly?" Rowan removed one glove slowly. "Only when the enemy arrives politely in carriages." Clara exhaled softly through her nose. Then silence returned again. Heavy. Familiar now somehow. Rowan moved toward the fire and adjusted one burning log carefully. Nathaniel returned from the outer gates an hour ago. Clara's stomach tightened immediately. And Carrington sent letters to every council family before dawn. Rowan's voice cooled another degree. "Tonight's meeting will not be private anymore." Clara wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. "What does that mean?" Rowan looked toward her steadily. "It means they intend to force a public decision regarding your identity." Fear crawled sharply through her chest again. "I cannot stand in front of those people." "Yes," Rowan said quietly. "You can." Clara shook her head immediately. "You do not understand." Rowan crossed the room slowly until only a few feet separated them. "No," he corrected softly. "I understand perfectly." His gray eyes held hers steadily. "You spent 14 years surviving men powerful enough to erase your name from history. Facing them in one room will not destroy you." Clara looked away first because something inside his voice made breathing difficult suddenly. Nobody had ever spoken to her like she was strong before. Rowan studied her carefully. "What are you afraid of most?" The answer escaped before she could stop it. "That they will look at me and still decide I am worth nothing." Silence followed instantly. Rowan's expression changed. Not pity. Something darker. Angrier. "Clara." She swallowed hard. "I was a servant yesterday. You were hidden yesterday." His voice lowered. "There is a difference." Clara stared down at the carpet beneath her bare feet. "People like Carrington decide value." Rowan stepped closer. No, the word landed hard enough to make her look up again. Rowan's eyes remained fixed on hers with terrifying certainty. "Men like Carrington only decide what they can control." Silence stretched between them. Too close now. Too quiet. Clara became suddenly aware of the heat from the fireplace behind him and the faint scent of cedar smoke clinging to his coat. Dangerous things to notice. Rowan finally stepped back first. "You will need proper clothing for tonight." Clara blinked faintly. "What?" "You cannot appear before the council dressed as a servant." Panic flashed instantly across her face. "No," Rowan frowned slightly. "No. I cannot walk into that room pretending to be someone I am not." Something almost painful crossed his expression briefly. "Clara, I do not know how to be her anymore." The confession settled heavily between them. Rowan understood instantly. Not fear of gowns or titles. Fear of failing the ghost of the girl she used to be. He moved toward the writing desk slowly. "My mother once told me something after my first military ceremony." Clara watched him carefully. Rowan rarely spoke about family. "What?" Rowan looked toward the snow outside the windows. "She said dignity is not clothing. It is the decision to stand upright after the world spends years trying to bend you." Clara felt her chest tighten unexpectedly. Rowan glanced back toward her again. "You already possess more dignity than most aristocrats I know." Silence followed. Softer this time. A knock interrupted before Clara could answer. Evelyn entered carrying several garment boxes behind 2 nervous maids. Her eyes moved instantly between Clara and Rowan. Whatever she noticed in the silence between them sharpened her expression slightly. The dressmaker arrived. Clara stiffened immediately. No, Evelyn sighed softly. Unfortunately, that is no longer optional. The maids carefully placed velvet boxes across the bed before retreating quickly. Rowan moved toward the door. You have 2 hours. Clara looked toward him instantly. For what? To stop looking at every hallway like you expect execution. Something dangerously close to dry humor touched his voice. Clara stared at him in surprise. Rowan opened the door slowly before pausing. And Clara. She looked up again. His gaze held hers another second too long. No one in that council chamber outranks your survival. Then he left. Silence settled heavily once the door closed behind him. Evelyn watched Clara carefully beside the bed. You affect him. Clara looked away immediately. No, yes. Evelyn crossed her arms slowly. I have known Rowan for years. He does not protect people emotionally unless they matter. Clara's pulse quickened uncomfortably. He is protecting evidence. Evelyn laughed softly beneath her breath. Keep telling yourself that. Clara said nothing, because some part of her had begun noticing it too. The way Rowan always positioned himself between her and danger without thinking. The way his voice changed around her. The way his eyes followed every flicker of fear across her face like he wanted to destroy whatever caused it. Evelyn opened the first garment box carefully. Deep silver silk spilled beneath the morning light like winter water. Clara stared at it in shock. Absolutely not. It belonged to Rowan's mother. Clara looked up sharply. Evelyn nodded once. The former Duchess of Blackthorn wore it during a Parliament winter gala nearly 20 years ago. Clara stepped backward immediately. I cannot wear that. Why? Because I was scrubbing floors 2 nights ago. Evelyn's expression softened unexpectedly. And? Clara stared at her in disbelief. Evelyn sighed quietly. You think aristocratic women are born understanding these rooms? She shook her head faintly. Most of us spend our lives terrified someone will discover we are pretending too. Clara looked toward the silver gown again. Beautiful. Elegant. Entirely wrong for someone like her. You dislike me? Clara said quietly. Evelyn paused. Honest surprise crossed her face briefly. Not exactly. You looked at me like a problem. Evelyn closed the garment box slowly. Because I thought Rowan was interested in another frightened servant girl. Clara frowned faintly. Another? Evelyn looked toward the windows. After his wife died, Rowan spent years rescuing broken things he could not save. Her voice lowered slightly. War widows. Orphans. Former soldiers. Clara's chest tightened unexpectedly. I did not know. He hides it deliberately. Evelyn's eyes returned toward Clara carefully. But he has not looked at any of them the way he looks at you. Silence settled sharply. Clara lowered her gaze immediately because hearing the words aloud felt too dangerous somehow. Before Evelyn could speak again, another knock sounded at the chamber door. Nathaniel entered quickly. Rowan sent me. Clara's stomach tightened instantly. What happened? Nathaniel's expression darkened. Carrington accelerated the meeting. How? Evelyn asked sharply. Nathaniel looked directly toward Clara. The council demanded proof of identity before noon. Silence exploded through the room. Clara felt cold immediately. Today? Nathaniel nodded once. And Carrington brought someone with him. Rowan appeared behind Nathaniel at that exact moment. His face had become unreadable again. Dangerous calm. Who? Clara whispered. Rowan held her gaze steadily before answering. A woman claiming to be your legal guardian. Clara stopped breathing entirely. Margaret Vale had protected her. Mrs. Aldridge hid her. But only one woman ever held legal authority over Clara Whitmore after Blackmere burned. Lady Beatrice Whitmore, her aunt, the woman who vanished the same week the estate caught fire. Rowan's voice lowered carefully. She says you belong to her. The cruelest people rarely looked cruel at first. They looked elegant, polite, respectable. That was how they gained access to children before teaching them fear. Clara could not breathe for one long terrible second after Rowan spoke her aunt's name. Lady Beatrice Whitmore, the woman who vanished after the Blackmere fire. The woman Clara remembered only in fragments sharp enough to leave scars. Velvet perfume, diamond rings, cold eyes that never softened around children. Evelyn looked immediately alarmed. Beatrice Whitmore is alive? Nathaniel's expression darkened beside the doorway. Apparently, Rowan never looked away from Clara. Do you want to see her? No. The answer rose instantly inside Clara's chest. No. Every instinct screamed it. But another emotion surfaced beneath the fear now. Anger. 14 years buried beneath obedience and silence. 14 years hidden in servant quarters while the people responsible for destroying her family continued attending balls and council dinners beneath chandeliers. Clara slowly lifted her chin. Yes. Rowan studied her carefully. You are certain? No, her voice steadied anyway. But I am done hiding from ghosts. Something shifted across Rowan's expression. Not surprise. Pride perhaps. Dangerous, quiet pride. Evelyn noticed it too and looked away first. Rowan moved toward Clara slowly. Then she sees you on our terms. Clara frowned faintly. Our? Rowan's voice remained calm. You are not facing these people alone anymore. The words settled heavily through the chamber. Clara felt her pulse quicken again for reasons far more dangerous than fear. Rowan stepped toward the garment boxes resting across the bed. Get dressed. Clara glanced toward the silver gown uncertainly. This feels dishonest somehow. Rowan shook his head once. No, his eyes held hers steadily. Pretending you are still a servant would be dishonest. Silence followed. Clara looked away before he could see how deeply the words affected her. 1 hour later, the east drawing room below Blackthorn's main staircase had transformed into something colder than a courtroom. Servants lined the outer walls in terrified silence, while council messengers moved quietly between marble columns carrying sealed documents and silver trays no one touched. Snow still battered the windows outside, but inside the estate everything felt dangerously still. Clara paused at the top of the staircase with one gloved hand resting lightly against the railing. She barely recognized herself. The silver gown Rowan's mother once wore fit perfectly despite years hidden in storage. Long sleeves, high collar, elegant without softness. Her pale hair pinned carefully back with the restored silver ribbon recovered from the hidden compartment upstairs. The same ribbon she wore in the burned portrait. Below her, conversations stopped one by one. Nobles turned slowly toward the staircase. Shock spread through the room almost instantly, because the servant girl from Blackthorn now looked unmistakably aristocratic. Clara felt every stare like pressure against her skin. Rowan stood near the center of the drawing room dressed entirely in black beside Nathaniel and several council officials already seated along the walls. When his eyes lifted toward the staircase, something in his face changed completely. Stillness. Not the cold stillness he carried around most people. Something quieter, almost stunned. Clara's breath caught softly. No one had ever looked at her that way before, like she had stepped out of memory instead of servant corridors. Nathaniel noticed Rowan's expression immediately and hid a faint smile behind his whiskey glass. Evelyn noticed too. Her eyes darkened briefly before softening with reluctant understanding. Clara forced herself down the staircase one careful step at a time. Do not show fear. Rowan's words echoed steadily inside her mind now. The crowd parted automatically before she even reached the floor. That startled her more than anything else. Power recognized itself quickly in rooms like these. At the far end of the drawing room, Lord Carrington remained seated near the fire with one gloved hand resting against his cane. Beside him sat a woman wrapped in dark burgundy silk and diamonds sharp enough to cut candlelight apart. Lady Beatrice Whitmore. Clara stopped moving instantly. Her aunt looked older now. Beautiful still in the polished, cruel way some aristocratic women preserve themselves through money and calculation. But the eyes remained exactly the same. Cold blue. Evaluating. Possessive. Beatrice rose slowly from her chair. Clara. The name sounded wrong in her voice, like ownership instead of affection. Clara kept her spine straight with effort. Lady Whitmore. A flicker of irritation crossed Beatrice's face immediately. She had expected weakness. Tears perhaps. Not distance. Rowan moved silently beside Clara before the older woman could step closer. Protective without touching her. Carrington noticed that instantly. So did everyone else in the room. How emotional, Beatrice murmured softly. Rowan's expression remained carved from stone. State your business. Beatrice looked mildly amused. My business concerns my niece. Clara nearly laughed at the word. Niece. As though Beatrice had not vanished while Clara spent 14 years, hidden beneath false names and locked doors. Carrington rose carefully beside her. Lady Whitmore came voluntarily after hearing troubling rumors involving Clara's identity. Rowan's voice cooled another degree. Interesting timing. Beatrice ignored him completely. Her gaze remained fixed on Clara with unsettling intensity. You look so much like Eleanor. Clara's throat tightened painfully at her mother's name. Beatrice noticed. Of course she noticed. Cruel people always recognized emotional wounds fastest. Your mother was too trusting, Beatrice continued softly. It destroyed her. Rowan stepped slightly closer beside Clara. Enough. Beatrice finally looked toward him. Protective already, Ashbourne? Rowan's expression did not change. Careful. Carrington intervened smoothly before tension sharpened further. We are not here for personal disputes. Nathaniel muttered under his breath. Could have fooled me. Several council members shifted uncomfortably near the walls. Everyone in the room understood something dangerous was unfolding beneath polished aristocratic manners. Beatrice returned her attention toward Clara again. I spent years searching for you. Clara stared at her in disbelief. That is a lie. Silence crashed instantly through the drawing room. Several nobles looked shocked. A servant speaking bluntly to aristocracy would have been scandalous. Clara Whitmore speaking that way as the surviving Blackmere heir felt different. Stronger somehow. Beatrice's eyes hardened slightly. Excuse me? Clara's pulse pounded violently now, but she did not retreat. Not this time. You abandoned me. Beatrice's voice softened falsely. You were hidden for your protection. In locked attics? The room went completely silent. Rowan's jaw tightened beside her. Beatrice recovered quickly. Difficult times require difficult decisions. Clara laughed softly beneath her breath. Exhausted. Bitter. I was 8 years old. Something flickered across Carrington's face then. Concern, perhaps. Not for Clara. For the room. Because sympathy had begun shifting visibly toward her now. Rowan noticed it too. His voice remained calm when he finally spoke. Lady Whitmore. Beatrice turned toward him carefully. Yes, Your Grace. Why did you never report Clara alive to the council? Silence. Tiny. Dangerous. Beatrice answered too slowly. I feared for her safety. Rowan's gray eyes sharpened instantly. Yet you left her hidden among servants for 14 years. Beatrice's composure slipped slightly now. You know nothing about what happened after Blackmere. Rowan stepped closer. Then explain it. Carrington interrupted before she could answer. This discussion belongs before the full council tonight. Rowan looked toward him coldly. No, Carrington's expression hardened slightly. Ashbourne. No, firmer this time. If Lady Whitmore wishes to reclaim legal guardianship over Clara, she answers questions now. The room shifted immediately. Power. Rowan had just forced the confrontation into the open before Beatrice could control the narrative. Clara realized suddenly he was protecting her publicly. Not quietly anymore. Publicly. Beatrice noticed it too. Her eyes narrowed slightly toward Rowan. You are unusually invested in this matter. Rowan never looked away from her. A child disappeared under council supervision. His voice lowered dangerously. That concerns me. Silence followed sharply. Beatrice adjusted one diamond bracelet slowly. Tiny movement. Controlled. Very well. Her gaze returned toward Clara again. The truth is unpleasant. Clara held her stare steadily. So was being forgotten. Something colder entered Beatrice's face then. Your father refused to cooperate. Rowan's expression sharpened instantly. Cooperate with what? Beatrice ignored him. Elias Whitmore planned to expose powerful families. Men who could destroy all of us. Clara's stomach tightened painfully. So you helped them. I protected what remained. Clara stared at her aunt in disbelief. By erasing me? By keeping you alive. The words cracked through the room hard enough to silence even the servants near the walls. Beatrice stepped closer despite Rowan's presence. You think survival is gentle? Her voice lowered. You think frightened little girls survive political wars without sacrifices? Clara's pulse hammered painfully now, because part of her hated that some twisted version of the statement might be true. Beatrice saw the hesitation instantly and pressed harder. I made impossible choices after your parents died. Rowan cut in sharply. Did they? Silence exploded through the room. Carrington stiffened slightly. Beatrice turned toward Rowan slowly. Excuse me? Rowan's eyes became ice. Did Elias and Eleanor Whitmore actually die in the fire? Clara stopped breathing. Beatrice's composure fractured for one dangerous second. Nathaniel noticed immediately. So did Carrington. Rowan stepped closer. You never identified the bodies personally. Beatrice said nothing. Rowan's voice lowered further. Which means there is another possibility. Clara stared at him in shock. No, impossible. Rowan looked directly at Beatrice now. Someone wanted the council to believe the Whitmore bloodline ended completely. Silence crashed through the drawing room. Beatrice finally smiled then. Small, cold, terrifying. You are smarter than your father ever was, Ashbourne. Every person in the room went still. Rowan's expression hardened instantly. What does that mean? Beatrice looked toward Clara one last time. It means your parents were not the only people who disappeared after Blackmere burned. Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Rowan moved immediately beside her as her balance wavered slightly. His hand closed carefully around her arm. Steady, warm, protective. Beatrice noticed that too. Her smile deepened faintly. How unfortunate, she murmured softly, that you are beginning to care for her right before everything becomes dangerous. Rowan's gaze turned lethal. Leave. Beatrice looked almost amused now. You still do not understand what kind of war you stepped into. Rowan did not raise his voice. He did not have to. Get out of my house. Carrington stepped forward immediately. The council convenes in 4 hours. His eyes settled briefly on Clara. Bring her. Then they left together beneath crushing silence, while the entire drawing room remained frozen in shock. Clara stood motionless near the staircase, struggling to breathe around the impossible hope Beatrice's words had awakened. Rowan still held her arm carefully. She barely noticed until his thumb brushed lightly against her sleeve once, grounding her. Clara. She looked up slowly. Rowan's gray eyes held hers steadily. What if my parents survived? She whispered. Rowan's expression softened in the smallest dangerous way. Then we find them. The world did not change when the truth was discovered. It changed when someone powerful finally chose which side of the truth they were willing to burn for. Night fell hard over Hawthorne Manor. Snow covered the enormous council estate in pale silver beneath rows of gas lanterns, while carriage wheels crushed ice across the circular drive outside. Northern aristocrats filled the grand hall in dark velvet and polished jewels, their voices low with rumor and unease beneath towering chandeliers. Everyone had heard by now. The Whitmore girl survived. Clara stood motionless beside the entrance doors, wearing silver silk beneath Rowan Ashbourne's black overcoat draped carefully across her shoulders against the cold. She had never seen a room this large before. Marble columns, gold-trimmed balconies, politicians, banking families, judges, men capable of destroying entire bloodlines with signatures and smiles. Fear pressed sharply beneath her ribs. Rowan noticed instantly. Breathe. Clara looked toward him. He stood beside her, dressed entirely in black again. Calm, controlled, terrifyingly composed. The entire ballroom shifted subtly around his presence the moment he entered. Conversations lowered. Men straightened. Women watched carefully from behind crystal glasses. Power moved differently around Rowan Ashbourne. Clara finally understood that now. "I should not be here," she whispered. Rowan's gray eyes held hers steadily. "Yes." Clara frowned faintly. Rowan stepped slightly closer so only she could hear the next words. "Because they spent 14 years making certain you never could be." Silence settled briefly between them. Then Rowan offered his arm without hesitation. Clara stared at it in surprise. Not because the gesture itself shocked her. Because every noble in the room was watching now. Publicly. Deliberately. Rowan raised one eyebrow slightly. "Clara." Her pulse quickened dangerously. Slowly she placed trembling fingers against his arm. The ballroom fell almost completely silent. Nathaniel appeared near the back wall, already hiding a faint grin behind his whiskey glass. Evelyn stood farther away beside several duchesses, watching the scene with unreadable eyes. Carrington noticed immediately from the council platform at the center of the room. So did Lady Beatrice Whitmore. Shock rippled visibly through the gathered aristocrats because everyone understood what Rowan's gesture meant. Protection. Recognition. Choice. He was not escorting a servant girl tonight. He was presenting Clara Whitmore beside him openly before the entire Northern Council. Rowan guided her calmly through the ballroom while whispers followed like smoke. "That is her. The Whitmore heir. She looks exactly like Eleanor." Clara kept her spine straight with effort. "Do not show fear." Rowan's hand shifted once lightly over hers against his arm, grounding her again without words. At the far end of the hall, 6 council seats stood elevated beneath enormous oil portraits of Northern founders. 5 men occupied them now. Carrington at the center. Silver hair. Black stone ring. Cold eyes watching Clara carefully. Rowan stopped directly before the council platform. Silence swallowed the ballroom entirely. Carrington rose slowly. "Your Grace." Rowan's expression remained carved from ice. "Lord Carrington." Carrington's gaze shifted toward Clara. "Miss Whitmore." Clara lifted her chin carefully despite the fear pounding inside her chest. "Lord Carrington." The older man smiled faintly. "You survived remarkably difficult circumstances." Rowan answered before Clara could. "Interesting phrasing." Carrington ignored him. "Tonight's gathering concerns legal clarification regarding the Whitmore inheritance and related council accusations." Nathaniel muttered quietly from the crowd. "Related accusations. That is one way to describe arson and corruption." Several nobles looked uncomfortable. "Good." Rowan's voice cut cleanly through the silence. "Then let us clarify something immediately." Carrington folded his hands calmly. "Proceed." Rowan stepped forward once. 14 years ago House Whitmore was declared extinct after Blackmore Estate burned. He looked directly toward the council seats. Yet the surviving daughter was hidden illegally under false employment records, while financial assets tied to orphaned Northern estates vanished into council-controlled holdings. Murmurs exploded instantly across the ballroom. Carrington's expression cooled slightly. "Serious accusations require evidence." Rowan lifted one gloved hand slightly. Nathaniel moved forward, immediately carrying the recovered ledgers, letters, and pocket watch documents from Blackthorn. Gasps spread softly through the room. Carrington recognized the papers instantly. So did Beatrice. Clara saw real fear flicker across her aunt's face for the first time. Rowan's voice remained calm. "Elias Whitmore documented fraudulent inheritance transfers before his estate burned. He placed the ledgers onto the council table one by one. Payment records, bribery accounts, false death certifications." Silence crashed heavily now. Several councilmen looked pale. One older judge reached immediately toward the documents with shaking hands. Carrington did not move. "These records prove nothing independently." "No," Rowan agreed quietly. "Which is why I brought witnesses too." The ballroom doors opened sharply behind them. Every head turned. Margaret Vale entered first beneath escort guards. Then another figure stepped slowly into the candlelight beside her. Older now, lean from years in hiding, gray threaded through dark hair, but unmistakably Whitmore. Clara stopped breathing entirely. Uncle Henry. Henry Whitmore looked toward her across the ballroom, and emotion shattered openly across his face. Clara! The room erupted into chaos. Nobles whispered loudly now while several council members stood in visible shock. Carrington finally lost composure completely for one dangerous second. Rowan noticed instantly. Interesting, he said softly. You genuinely thought he was dead. Henry crossed toward Clara quickly before stopping himself just short of embracing her like someone afraid she might disappear if touched. Tears burned suddenly behind Clara's eyes. You survived. Henry nodded shakily. Margaret hid me after the fire. His eyes darkened toward the council seats. Because your father discovered Carrington and 3 others were stealing inheritance territories through falsified claims. Carrington stood abruptly. This is outrageous. Rowan turned toward him slowly. Sit down. The command cracked through the ballroom hard enough to silence everyone instantly. Carrington stared at him in disbelief. Rowan's expression became lethal. You buried a child. You burned records. You manipulated northern estates for nearly 15 years. His voice lowered another degree. Sit down before Parliament hears about your behavior from someone less patient than me. Carrington actually hesitated. Fear spread visibly now through the gathered aristocrats because no one had ever seen Rowan Ashbourne openly challenge the Northern Council like this before. Clara realized suddenly the entire room had shifted around him. Power itself was moving. Beatrice rose sharply from her chair. You cannot prove Theodore ordered the fire. Henry Whitmore looked toward her with exhausted disgust. You helped him. Silence exploded again. Beatrice's composure cracked instantly. I protected this family. You protected money. Henry's voice broke slightly. Clara was 8 years old. Clara stared at her aunt while years of confusion finally settled into brutal clarity. Beatrice chose wealth over blood, titles over children, survival over love. Rowan stepped slightly closer beside Clara again. She barely noticed until warmth brushed lightly against her sleeve. There is one final matter, Rowan said quietly. Nathaniel handed him another sealed document. Rowan unfolded it carefully before placing it directly onto the council table. Jonathan Ashbourne's private testimony before his death. Carrington's face lost color immediately. Rowan's voice remained calm while reading aloud. If anything happens to Elias Whitmore or his family, investigate Theodore Carrington immediately. He threatened Elias during the final council meeting regarding inheritance audits tied to Northern Widow estates. The ballroom went completely silent. Carrington looked suddenly old beneath the chandeliers. Cornered. This proves nothing legally, he said weakly. Rowan folded the paper slowly. No, his eyes hardened. But Parliament investigators arriving outside currently may disagree. Shock crashed through the room again. Nathaniel almost smiled openly now. Timing really is everything. Heavy knocking thundered suddenly through the grand hall entrance. Guards opened the doors moments later, revealing government officials in dark coats carrying sealed warrants beneath the snow. Panic spread visibly among several council members. Carrington went pale. Rowan never looked away from him. You should have left the girl dead, Carrington whispered bitterly. Clara felt Rowan shift beside her before he answered. No, silence fell again. Rowan's voice lowered carefully. You should have remembered she belonged to someone willing to come back for her. Clara looked toward him sharply. The words hit harder than everything else tonight. Belonged. Not as possession. As protection. As certainty. Carrington was escorted from the ballroom moments later alongside 2 other council members, while chaos erupted across the estate. Nobles whispered furiously. Reporters gathered outside gates. Power fractured visibly in real time. But Clara barely heard any of it. She stood near the center of the ballroom while Henry held her hands like someone terrified to lose family twice. Margaret cried quietly near the staircase. Evelyn watched from the crowd with reluctant admiration. And Rowan Ashbourne remained beside Clara through all of it without once stepping away. Hours later the ballroom finally emptied beneath fading candlelight. Snow drifted softly beyond the tall windows now. Quiet after war. Clara stood alone near the balcony doors staring across frozen gardens touched silver by moonlight when Rowan approached behind her. "Cold?" he asked quietly. Clara smiled faintly without turning around. "A little." Rowan settled his coat around her shoulders again automatically. Familiar now somehow. Dangerous how familiar it already felt. Silence rested softly between them for several seconds. Not uncomfortable, just full. Clara finally looked toward him. "You destroyed half the Northern Council for me." Rowan's expression remained unreadable. "No," he stepped closer beneath the moonlit windows. "I destroyed them because they deserved it." Clara searched his face carefully. "And the rest?" Something shifted behind his gray eyes then. No walls left now. No distance. Just truth. "The rest," he said quietly, "was for you." Her breath caught softly. Rowan looked at her the way powerful men looked at things they had already chosen beyond reason. Beyond caution. Clara felt her pulse quicken dangerously beneath the silence stretching between them. "I was a floor made 4 days ago," she whispered. Rowan stepped close enough now that the world beyond him disappeared entirely. "No," his voice softened in the smallest impossible way. "You were a Whitmore forced to survive like one." Clara stared at him while emotion pressed painfully against her chest again. "And now?" Rowan's gaze held her steadily beneath falling snow and fading candlelight. "Now," he said quietly, "you never stand alone again."